Zoning Commission, and this meeting is informal and designed to guide applicants through the process of obtaining a certificate of appropriateness or a COA for projects within the city's historic district in light of the historic district design guidelines. Applicant participation in this meeting is voluntary but highly recommended, and changes made or suggestions taken by the applicants based on discussion with DRC are the applicant's choice, but the DRC makes no representation as to whether any changes or suggestions made during the meeting will be approved by the voting body, the Historic Zoning Commission. This afternoon, we have 7 items on the agenda. When the item is called, please introduce yourself and generally describe your item in about 2 to 3 minutes. I'll remind everybody to make sure and hit your button and speak loudly into your microphone. The TV people love it. For all our audience. Okay, item number 1, discussion of awning installation at 900 Fair Street. Mr. Scott, come on up.
Good afternoon. Steve and Kathy Scott, 900 Fair Street. We were here last month, and last we spoke, I think that kind of the direction that we got from the commission was to go back and decide what we wanted to try to pursue, maybe do a rendering or mock-up, Photoshop, whatnot, to kind of understand where we're going with this. We've talked to a couple of fabricators and got a couple of options of rendering that we want to float past the design review committee to see where we stand as far as palatability. One thing I will talk about before we look at these renderings or the Photoshops is the material itself. To make something similar to what you're seeing on the screen now, both fabricators really sent me down the path of copper because it will patina and it'll blend in more as age gets there, but going with a straight painted metal to bend that profile, it's going to look to their eyes very cheap, and it's going to show indentions, it's going to show rivet marks and things like that, where it's really going to get bent up and create something on the front of the house that doesn't really appeal. So if we go with something that's not copper, it's going to have to be more of a straight, or it can be convex, but what they're showing on that, like the Juliet awning that you see there, is both fabricators really tried to get me to go against the not doing copper. They wanted to do copper. They said that's really the only thing that would look somewhat not cheapened by this fabrication. So what you're seeing there is just one option that, if you recall what's on the house now, that I think everyone in the commission thought was maybe a good idea to go away, that the green round awning that doesn't represent the squareness of that opening right there. So this is the first option, and if you go to the other page, the rendering of that, that's kind of the dimensions. The opening itself is 6 feet, so it covers just about 6 inches on each side of the opening. The current awning is 3-foot projection, which is what that is right there. It's actually, the current awning is a little bit over 3 feet, so that's a little bit less projection, not much. The rise of 5 feet is about the same. It's actually almost exactly the same. And the 3-foot taper to the top is somewhat just arbitrary from just a design element standpoint. That's kind of what we thought would look about right, and that's pretty much what's shown in the Photoshop version of that copper Juliet style awning. So that's the first one we wanted to float by the group to see if there's any feedback or concerns or a direction before we move on to the other option that's out there.
Okay, perfect. Elizabeth, do you have some staff comments for us?
Thank you, and thank you to the applicant for returning with 2 options to discuss this evening. Staff would like to bring to attention that the proposed material being metal is not consistent with the guidelines recommended, which recommend to use canvas or cotton or a polyester blend for the material of the awning. The use of metal awnings is seen on some Tudor-style homes, but is not common in Franklin. The proposed placement appears to be appropriate with both options. as it is centered over the main entrance. The use of a fluted awning is not commonly seen on residential buildings in the district, so a straight line awning is more common. As the material is not consistent with the guidelines, the awning is not supported as proposed with the metal material. At previous DRCs, it was supported to use metal as a material due to the age and uniqueness of the style of the building. So we would like additional feedback on the two proposed designs to guide the applicant forward.
Okay, perfect, thank you. All right, anyone want to jump into this one first? Lisa?
I'll start us
Sure.
out. So I know we've approved copper awnings before, and I'm thinking in particular the corner of, I think it's 3rd Avenue and First, wait, yeah. Anyway, the copper, even though, like in this rendering, is startling because it's shiny, at first, on that proposal where we approved it, I thought, wow, I'm surprised we approved this because it was kind of jarring. But it certainly does acquire a really nice patina. My question would be that the awning on the left, is that metal?
Yes.
Metal, okay. And in terms of the context, what do we have like next door, and what's on the left and what's on the right of this particular building?
Might be able to pull up Google Street View or something and see what
While
we've
she's
got.
pulling that up, I can tell you that's Mr. Hardcastle's house, and it doesn't have an awning. It's a front porch that's full with a, it's just a porch roof. It's not an awning at all.
Mhm.
And on the right is a 9th Avenue, so.
They're telling me to move you up here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay,
Yeah.
it's got a wraparound on the left, and then it's a corner lot.
I mean, the beauty of copper is that the patina it acquires over time is really beautiful. It is something we've approved in the past, I know that for sure. And even though the guidelines may not reflect that specifically, in my opinion, this option 1, which I assume is your preference?
Yes, ma'am.
is I think, very attractive and appropriate for this residence.
Thank you, Lisa. Do you have something, Madeline?
So, Elizabeth, can you zoom in on that?
Just that,
So, did it used to be green, the other awning, and now
yes, that's an old Google Maps picture. She probably has a picture of the current house as it stands. See, the screens are gone from the doorway, the screens are gone from the porch, and that, what used to be green up there on the left is now a bronze.
I'm not, I like copper, it definitely starts out shiny, and then the patina over time, I think, could be very complementary to the other awnings being bronze. Oh, I'm not, that's why. Could be, when it patinas complementary to the bronze awning that's on the other side. But what was your decision behind going copper versus a bronze to match the other one?
The fabricators, for this particular design, the fabricators we spoke to kind of dissuaded us from going with the metal because it would, the way that metal bends and the way they use, it starts to look cheap, and it'll show indentions where the screws are and the rivets or whatever they're using, and it's both of them independently, without me bringing it up, said you're not going to like the result of that size awning made of metal, especially when you can use copper. It's going to be obviously more expensive, but it will patina down to look very, very muted compared to what you're seeing there. I wish I had the ability to maybe show you future state, but I wanted to give you, full disclosure, that's what it's going to look like to begin with if we go this direction. So-
Right.
But they
right.
did say it would not look, it wouldn't be what we're looking for in the aesthetic to
Yeah.
go with something else.
I'm familiar with what it looks like after it's patinaed over time, and I do think they would complement each other. I was just curious, but the other, and that makes sense. The only other question I have is doing when I look at just the center portion with the convex awning that you're proposing, I think it looks great, but when I look at it with the existing awning to the left, the convex with the concave, have y'all explored an option of doing something that would mimic the convex?
The second option may be closer to what you're talking about.
And that one's just flat or straight shed roof. Okay. Okay.
And I will say, if the committee totally wanted to get away from the copper look, I would not pursue option one, because I don't want to build option one with a bronze metal. It's just not going to look right.
I don't know that I'm opposed to copper. I think it makes sense. It does just take time to kind of complement with the patina, but I'm more so just curious of the shape. That's where I'm getting tripped up a little bit with the consistency from the existing awning on the left.
Understood.
Okay. Brian, anything?
Yeah, let's just explore that. So you've got concave and convex, and so the contrast of that is kind of what's throwing you off a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with Lisa and Madeline on the copper. I think copper's a fine choice for that. It will patina over time. Your fabricator's right. You probably would not be happy with the way that painted Kevlar, Kylar, whatever surface they call that paint, would crack. So I guess those would be my comments at the moment. But that is your choice, number one, with the swooping concave awning.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I too have no issue with the copper. I think it's the best material choice. The shape is, like Madeline said, it's standalone. It's like, oh, that looks great. And then you look at it with the other one, it is different, but there's a lot of different things going on this house. There's 2 different roof pitches. We got arches and flat tops, and we have literally a little flat piece of gambrel roof that peaks up. I mean, it's like, if it can be an architectural thing, it's on this house. I don't know at this point, with kind of the eclectic nature and collection of shapes and things that are on it, that it makes a whole lot of difference in my mind. I think if it were convex like the bay, it's gonna mimic what was there already, because it's just gonna be a different type of bubble. So I think this is more elegant. I think it lends itself towards the verticality, and this has probably nothing to do with design guidelines, but accentuating the front door, and I think it nods to its verticality and draws your eye up a little more. And that's probably the prettiest front-facing gable on this house. The other one's kind of a short, squat one. It's just, it's peculiar. So anything you can do to highlight the verticality and draw the eye to that center is good in my opinion. So I'm happy with it, what you've presented. So
Okay.
any other specific questions or feedback we can give you?
No, I mean, if I think what I'm hearing, if I can summarize, is we come to the voting meeting with what we brought today, and I think we've got, if there's any tweaks or anything that I should do or know about prior to that meeting that would make it more palatable, I would certainly entertain that, but if not, I'll go with what we've got and see
Yeah.
what happens.
What I'd say is bring as much detail as you can. If they've got like the brackets that hold that up, if they've got just a drawing of that, if it's something that's off the shelf, bring it, and then note what that is, if it's painted or raw wrought iron or oiled wrought iron or whatever it is. Just let us know as much detail as you can. I think the dimensions you gave of the actual hood shape is perfect, and we know what that material is. But anything about the brackets is helpful, just so that there's no question as to what is going on the building. Does that sound fair? Lisa?
Then maybe some other images of residences throughout Franklin where you see something similar, that would be helpful too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
Okay.
of course, I wouldn't mind seeing another mock-up similar to option 1 and 2. I don't think it'd be too different from the second option, that's just the shed roof. Just bringing those brackets in, kind of like the convex one, and then showing it what it may look like with the convex option as well, to mimic what's over the bay.
Okay. I can certainly do that. My question, or maybe even concern, in the voting meeting, it's a little more clumsy to have two things you're trying to bring to the table when I'm really wanting the other thing. So I'm going ahead and bringing my backup plan, and then we vote, and then we vote it down, and so I get to serve up the next one and we vote. And is that how we want it to work, or should I try for what I want?
Yeah, you should, ultimately, the applicant is supposed to bring what they want us to consider. And it's much more formal, so we'll be voting on and discussing a proposal. There are some instances where we have option A's and B's, but we're not really supposed to do that. That's what this venue's for. And we've seen some. I think if you bring the one that you want to do, again, there's half of us not here. So you've heard from the folks that are here, and what they said last time as well, which is good. But bring the one you want in as much detail as possible about that one is what I would say.
Understood.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
Thank y'all very much. Appreciate it. Okay, item number 2, discussion of fencing at 1850 William Campbell Court. Mr. Horwath. Make sure your mic's on for us. Thank you so much.
Thank y'all for having us. So regarding the fencing, when we made a couple mistakes. Lance was on a vacation. I can't believe we let him take time, and I missed the notification. When we look at Magnolia Hall, historically, it was on the outskirts of Franklin, right? Gentry Farms and Magnolia have been known for quite some time to have the 4-rail fence. We came in before this body to look at our retaining wall fence that we're hopefully going to get started here pretty soon. And we decided to go with a 4-rail. We even looked at a double-sided 4-rail. We came back and said, there's no historic precedent for that. Y'all agreed. We went ahead and went with a single 4-rail over the retaining wall. And so all of this land used to be, is a portion of the ultimate big Magnolia Hall that existed decades and decades ago. So as we've developed, the 4-rail fence was in a state of disrepair. We've repaired all of it. We're going to have it on the retaining wall. Lot 1 no longer has the property like it did. It's a very defined piece of property. And so we are looking at ways to, for the public's perspective, what's private and what's public. So the 2 parks are private. The lake is not a public amenity. And the front park that, if you've been out there recently, is well under construction, or is finishing construction. That is also private, only to the residents of Magnolia Hall. They're the ones paying for the HOA. They're the ones that are utilizing those spaces. And so for us, we wanted to create this clear demarcation. These are private for community-only residents. The public segment is the sidewalk down the right-of-way in front of all of the houses, down to the cul-de-sac and back out. We are putting together packages for the signage, private areas for the park, and private areas for the lake, we'll be working with staff on that. And so in our opinion, to insert a new fence material of something that's been a staple of Magnolia to create that private-public realm, felt like it would not be incongruous with the retaining wall decision that was made in setting up that 4-rail and proceeding forward. So that's why we don't view that front park as a side yard, or it's a common open space that's private for the amenities for those residents, and the lake is private for those. And so we wanted to make sure people knew Lot 1, that's a private residence as well. And so we've been working with the owners, the Jones family, who y'all have seen quite a few times through here as they're doing the renovation. And that was the collective approach. So we really want to hear, we realized we needed to talk about the reason and the purpose, and the DRC meeting was not the right place, and that was my mistake. So thank you for having us and allowing us to present a bigger picture for discussion, and what are some of the thoughts that y'all have or concerns.
Sure. Okay. Let's hear from Elizabeth with some staff feedback first, and then we'll talk to the commission here.
Thank you. And this application was withdrawn from the Historic Zoning Commission meeting last week, and we thank the applicant for coming to DRC. The application is unchanged from the submittal, and which requests to install 4-board horse fencing shown in the red dashed line on the plans. The new fencing will run internally along the street and enclose the open space of the development. Another section of fencing is proposed closer to the historic home and will run behind the house and connect to the existing fencing along Glass Lane. The fencing will be 4 feet in height and painted black. The guidelines do recommend the following, and this is vested in the 2016 design guidelines: to erect fences along property lines of a residence. Primary yard fencing is located along front yard property lines in areas that are readily visible from the street. Wooden picket fences are the most common fencing material for the primary yard. Do not place wooden plank fences, solid brick fences, chain link fences, or other metal fences besides those of cast iron in primary yards, and do not use fences higher than 3 feet on front yards or higher than 7 feet on side or rear yards. So there is existing 4-board horse fencing along the perimeter of the property, which is placed in a more traditional location and was existing. Additionally, the design of the development was intended to preserve the open space in front of Magnolia Hall so that it continued to read as the front yard of the home. The proposed placement of the fencing does not preserve this appearance and creates additional divisions that are not traditional in a front yard. The development is vested, as mentioned, and this is not a recommended fence type for front yard fencing as it is today. Feedback on the appropriateness of the design of the fence and the location is greatly appreciated, as this does not meet the intent of the guidelines.
Okay, thank you. All right, who wants to kick us off here? Nobody? Mr. Bryan?
Well, just a question for staff.
Okay.
So the objection to the front yard fencing, we hear that. How about the rear yard fencing? Is there no objection to that one? Is it only the front yard fencing?
As it is not specifically mentioned as for horse board fencing as a recommended type, but there is more, you can have additional height in the rear yard, so that would meet it back there for that.
And what was that? Is it 30-inch front yard?
The recommended height for front yards is 3 feet tall, and this is a 4 foot
36.
tall fence.
Okay. So 36 inches is an issue in the front, and then it's not, I don't think at all, a recognized fence type at all in the old guidelines. And I'll be the first to kind of, own the fact that this is definitely different than maybe a typical kind of downtown Franklin lot. But I think going back to a lot of the back and forth on the overall master plan, where there were houses kind of where the walking trail is, and those were taken off with the intent that, hey, we really don't want to build anything in front of this house. So I guess the question in my mind is, are we considering that a construct of sorts, or how does that look? And then the 4-board horse fence, because it's been there for so long, seems like it's appropriate for this specific site. And I think we said as much on the retaining wall, and, you know, the whole property's surrounded with it. So in my mind, the question is it appropriate to really have the fencing in the front yard of the mansion? So, and I don't know the answer to that. And you know, this public versus private thing, I get the need for that, but at the same time, it's setting up a lot of layers between the road and something we're hoping to protect, a view shed for the public to kind of see one of our oldest houses in Franklin. Most grand, certainly one of them. So, anybody want, Brian?
The only thing I would add to that is that our guidelines, the intent of the guideline is to preserve that view shed. And I remember, like Tyler said, when this development came before us, I mean, there were homes in front of the house. And I think there was a lot of discussion about keeping the open space. And although I do understand this need for privacy, at the same time, it does interrupt the view shed. And I wonder if there's just not another way to put up some small signs or something that just say private property beyond this point that might serve as like a fence would. I'm not talking about a lot of them like a fence, but, you know, in certain places that are strategic. Because anybody could walk on the outside of that fence and get into the Magnolia Hall property. I mean, it's only protecting kind of the actual garden area with the path.
And part of our civil plans, part of the requirements of those was actually, as you can see in the landscaping, that was brought over, most of it. And it blocks a lot of the view shed from that main road, Boyd, from a tree caliber standpoint. So the only way at full growth, based on the parameters we had to meet, you're seeing it, and you have that initial on glass where that area is non-planting, is natural preserve area that was a requirement not to touch, clean up, or remove for all the neighbors on Glass Lane. So the front is accessed mainly from the front, our Weems Campbell Drive. That's really your view shed in, is the opening in and actually turning on to go to the cul-de-sac to come back out. And we took great care to create a beautiful common open space that would resemble or feel an estately mansion historically. But a lot of those, as you travel not only in the outskirts of Franklin, but what would be a context of Williamson County, is it's not uncommon for your main drive entrance to also have four-rail horse fencing too. And so we were trying to take cues of what this place stood for and the type of purpose that it had for the residents for quite some time. So I do want to highlight that we had to put a lot of trees,
Sure.
as you can currently see out there. And that wasn't necessarily always our decision. That was trying to meet the tree calibers and the locations and things we were asked to do through, as y'all know, many reviews by a lot of departments.
So your drive or ingress egress that you have on Glass Lane, is that mainly for the owner of Lot 1?
It is only for the owner of Lot 1, and no one else can use that. They have an easement through the open space there that was converted for stormwater maintenance, and we had to add some underground piping to connect those two bioretention areas. But yes, it is only for them. They're still debating how much they're going to use it. There's some current challenges with the size of that, so they're working on a plan to come forward as a standalone just for their lot for the hardscape elements.
Just a thought, if it happens that the board does not vote on the front yard fencing as far as in favor of it, I would still recommend that for symmetry, that the four-board fence also is on each side of that drive. If you're bringing around to the back, just a small portion in the front, so you still have an entrance.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
So
That
just-
makes a lot of sense.
If that happens and you come back, you might want to think about that,
Okay.
so that that's part of
You
it.
talking about on Glass Lane?
On Glass Lane.
Okay.
Because we do propose, right now, it is fenced, the blue line, it kind of looks blue on the screen. And then what those terminate as they currently do, and then they were coming in, moving the gate back out because the gate's in a horrible position to maneuver in and out. And so they're looking at bringing that gate back. And we were coming beside their future gate, widening it a little bit and connecting to Glass Lane on both sides to try to tie in the feeling of what has been established and what a lot of people know Magnolia to have that the four-rail horse fence all the way around it for quite some time. And so we were doing that, and then I could even see there being a little more of an entry off of I'm drawing a blank.
Boyd Mill?
So Boyd, we do have both sides we're proposing to turn in. William Campbell, on the north side of the house where they have their little circle entry, we can look at trying to tie that a little bit more so that it feels conducive that you're entering that private lot. But we do have it on, so thank you for helping me there. On Boyd, we do have it turned in on both sides. A small little element there just to complement. Glass, we have them going back to tie into the location. And then I could potentially see coming around those trees and creating that more of an entry to Lot 1 in their drive. And then as we came down the side, that was more of the side piece there goes in front of that bioretention, actually connects to the retaining wall. That dark line right there is a continuation of where it would just bolt on with the four-rail fence and continue up the hill past the historic smokehouse that we relocated.
Yeah, I'm trying to reconcile the idea of this kind of creating some privacy, and you explain kind of everything here is private to the residents except maybe the sidewalk and the right of way with the road.
That's it.
But in my mind, I keep thinking, are we addressing an issue that we don't even know if it's an issue yet? It's like we're putting up fence.
It is.
I mean, it's
We've
there are
had to call the police multiple times.
people walking around construction sites, maybe. It's just, but it's not done yet. So it's fence in the front yard seems like a peculiar thing when we worked hard to kind of move the lots off of that side and make it feel like it's the front yard of the mansion.
Do you know, and can you inform the board as to how far away is that four-board fence in the front yard from the actual Magnolia Hall? Do you know what the distance is? Or
We
that
can,
front yard?
if you give us just a couple minutes, Lance is pulling that up,
Okay.
and we can give you that distance.
Okay, thank you.
One of the things we did that you can see there on the front yard is, in most situations, I think you would have expected us to follow the property line of Lot 1 exactly and its confines. We worked with the Jones family to create a scenario where it serpentines and isn't so regimented, to more flowing and meeting and working around the existing tree canopy and trees that were such a huge emphasis of saving on the property. And so that's why it comes in and out, to pull away, but also to not feel, it was very, somebody just drew the lot lines, right? No one thought about how that would interact with the private park space. Do you have a dimension?
So coming straight off the front, it's at about 160, but obviously the fence kind of meanders and it gets as close as 130 feet.
Okay.
I would like to clarify
Thank
that
you.
the old guidelines do say to recess split rail fences at least 20 feet from the plane of the resident's primary facade. So it is listed in there.
Yeah, it's, like I said, I'm trying to find a way that this fits within the guidelines, because there's guidelines for a reason. But like 4-board horse fencing, it's already there. This was an agrarian kind of, this was a, you know, a whole entity, not just a house on a little lot. So I'm like, I can buy that all day long. And even in the backyard, you know, to meet our guidelines, it's supposed to be 20 feet behind. It's like, well, I can see this backyard fencing makes sense within the guidelines. It's just this front yard one doesn't specifically meet the guidelines. And like I said, I've not seen some hardship where we should break from that for some reason.
Can I say something?
Sure.
I think the intent here, and I hate to reminisce, but I've been working on this for 6 years. And so when Mary and I walked this land 6 years ago to try to figure out whether we could save this place, the whole intent was that this 12 acres was almost its own thing, because there's nothing like this in any historic district that I can find that I've seen anywhere. A 12-acre private lake, private park, basically view shed of 7 acres to save the house.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're using this fencing as kind of an anchor point of the whole thing, number one. Number two, so and then there's an aesthetic thing. But 3, we've got 2 private areas here, and one in particular that is vulnerable from a liability standpoint, to make sure that we don't have people going in there. During the construction process, early on, we had somebody try to kill themselves in this pond driving through this thing. So, which I found out from John Shore when I wasn't even in town. So I think the fencing aesthetically is going to be beautiful, but I think it's not like anything else.
Mm-hmm.
This is a one-off almost, and I don't want to call it Williamsburg because it's not, but it's that same kind of intent, which was why originally I wanted this to be a private road and the whole thing to be completely unique. So, I think this fence serves a lot of purposes and is going to be beautiful, and it's also going to serve to basically highlight the fact that the mansion, because none of the rest of the houses are going to engage with the fencing.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's like I said, I think this is totally unique. Agree with you there. I think the 4-board fence, to me, even though it's not in the guidelines, it has a long-standing precedent on the site. It's just, for me, the location of the front yard fencing, I keep imagining, okay, if it's not there, what's the difference? I guess people can walk in the road and go into that part, but they can climb a 4-board horse fence too, or they can go through the gate. There's a pedestrian gate. So it's
But
like,
it's going to have a sign there that says
don't do that. Yeah.
private park.
Yeah.
And if this thing is completely open at that front entrance, people are going to use that park like it's part of Jim Warren. And it's a public street, but it's not a public park.
And one thing to add on that is, in this part of town, the Gentry home being one of them, the historic Gentry home, actually designed by the same architect. At the same time, Glass was actually connected to the Gentrys, Mr. Glass. It isn't uncommon to have 4-rail fence as an entry access. A lot of our horse farms historically.
And I agree totally. I can find gobs and gobs of this vintage house that have horse fencing down both sides of the driveway. It's just in our guidelines, it's not specifically allowed. And it is not way out in the country now. I think it was. And so we have to balance that kind of feel because now it is in a neighborhood. And one, it's in a neighborhood around it, and then it's also in the neighborhood that y'all have built and designed. So, like I said, I'm trying to reconcile the idea of, yeah, horse fencing makes sense, it's already there. We've already approved some more of it on the retaining wall. I can buy that. It's this front yard thing is explicitly not allowed in either guidelines, the new ones or the old ones. And horse fencing is allowed in the new guidelines, so I'm like, well, I can concede on that, certainly. The front yard, even though this is different, there are houses up and down Boyd Mill that are some bigger lots, not this big, but they don't have a fence line driveway. And, you know, everybody on the street has to worry about privacy, and somebody coming onto their private lawn, this really, in my mind, is no different than somebody that has a smaller lot and doesn't want people on their lawn. It's something every homeowner has to contend with. So I'm probably don't support the front yard having more fencing because it already has one at the perimeter. And I probably would be in favor of having it across the back so it shows people who are walking the trail like, hey, this is the trail side of the property and that side is their backyard. We'll stay out of that. So
Well,
that's
and
my
also,
opinion.
oh,
Go ahead, Madeline.
go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, so, yeah, connecting in the back, the way that they have it, so that you have that privacy, but it's almost like we've got the double fence with it lining Glass Lane with the existing fencing, and then we have a double fence closer to the property. I mean, I understand connecting the new fencing to the existing at the gate on Glass Lane, and then having it at the back, like you're saying, but wrapping around the front, I'm with you, Tyler, on that.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, I'd like to see it try and meet the guidelines a little more succinctly. So if there's a 20-foot from the front facade, you know, instead of curling around the one that's on William Campbell Court, so coming off the retaining wall, instead of bringing it so far forward, you know, bring it back closer to what the demarcation and the guidelines say. And I don't think that makes, it's already open a large portion, so that probably from a privacy standpoint doesn't make a huge difference, but it starts to meet the guidelines. On the other side, tying to Glass Lane, it's like, well, there's a curb cut there and a driveway. That one makes sense, even though it passes the front plane of the house. There's some intent there, and that is the garage, what we would consider the back of house area for this property. So I could see that. And even a portion of this front fence that completes the Glass Lane gate, okay, makes sense to tie it all together. But to take it around this walking trail is a lot to ask because it really doesn't come close to meeting any of the guidelines. Did you have something, Lisa?
Just, I agree with you, Tyler, and I think what Brian was maybe suggesting is sort of a phasing in process. You know, for example, just don't propose this fencing quite yet, and see what happens with that privacy issue, the trespassing issue, and then come back. You know, I know you've already had issues happen with that, but once it's all said and done and the indicators are a lot more obvious for people, it may change the way it's interpreted by the public.
Yeah.
Has anything been said about the riparian buffer? About,
So the riparian buffer, so these highlighted areas are what they've considered. They're having challenges with this piece and this piece up.
so we're
That's-
able to basically secure this part so we can't get
It's
in there.
great that we jumped.
And so
I'm sorry I was late.
You talking
I was
the
thinking this was
purple?
at 5.
Well, they are at 5 once a month, and this one's at 4 the other week of the month.
So I apologize for
You're
being
all
late.
right.
I hate
So
being late.
let's not leave the fencing just yet. Just wanted to throw this out as a possibility, because it's not that the guideline prohibits front yard fencing.
Yeah, just,
It prohibits front yard fencing at this height and a floorboard fence. You could do another type of material
we're on
and
the same
find a
page.
way to work with that.
We're on the same page.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
Yeah,
I've
that's
been
right.
taking a lot of notes. I know where you're headed, and
Yeah.
this is why we withdrew it, is to have the conversation. The other meeting is not the time to have the conversation. We
Sure.
really appreciate everybody's feedback. We obviously are passionate. Y'all are passionate. Everyone's
No.
passionate in this town about Magnolia Hall. We want to do the right thing.
Yeah.
We obviously are bringing things that we've spent a lot of time
Sure.
on, and we hear loud and clear. I've demarcated places that I think potentially could be okay to create those few sheds that make sense and tight and around. And then how do we get and look at some other potential options that could achieve some similar results with plantings and/or small, shorter fences.
And you might, one thing that could be helpful, I'm looking at like the alignment of William Campbell Court, lines up more or less with the dead center of the house, the mansion, right? I know you have a lot of the property in 3D, so it might be helpful to go, what's that look like? You got some houses here, there's a sidewalk, what's a little fence look like? Show us a 4 foot tall, and if we all go, that's not a big deal. It's not explicitly in the guidelines, but neither is 12-acre thing like this, okay? But you could show it to us, but like I said, I have to see something more to be able to say, well, I'm willing to go against the guidelines, because just saying, well, we want more privacy. I'm like, well, me too, but I can't do it in my neighborhood. It's all those things. So I want to see it. So if there's a mechanism or avenue to produce something where we can see something rudimentary, like, hey, this is kind of what it looks like from the public view shed. Here's the house. Is it detracting from it? That's really what we want to consider.
Well,
There's some grade stuff that doesn't show up on this that plays into all this. So,
Thank you.
And if you're having difficulty with the public coming into all these private spaces, you may need to consider a gated community.
well, I spent a year trying to have a gated community. 1 year on a parallel track as to this. And I would have loved it to be gated and us maintain the road and put up a bond so the city would never have to worry about the street. Because I wanted an 18-foot wide street with pea gravel and granite curbs and save those other trees, you remember, that I didn't want to take down.
yeah,
And
understood.
Okay, well, I'm sorry I brought up a sore point.
But yeah,
We'll
thank you.
move on to the repair area.
But thank you, Brian. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, anything else on the fencing? I know we have
Yeah.
other topics. Everybody good on fencing?
Thank you.
Okay. Let's move forward to item number 3 here is the same property or series of properties, site alterations, site elements, gates, and lighting at lots 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right?
6, 2 through 6.
2 through 6 at the
6.
moment.
Okay.
It w-
So give us the quick and dirty, and then we'll hear from Elizabeth on her staff comments for these.
Thank you all again. This is only looking at 2 through 6. 7 through 10 and Lot 1 are being postponed till we discuss. This was the mistake that I mentioned last week, that we should have looked at all of this in concert, because these elements are what we are proposing to be repetitive hardscape elements with some small nuance differences as we move through the site. For consideration and discussion this afternoon are going to be a statement column with gas lantern that has mimicked a few properties and approvals around the city of Franklin. This is a 32-inch tall column and gas lantern on top that would be at the walkway entrance off of the public sidewalk at every home. The second element is a walkway to the front door, and we have proposed a paver We recognize that in the 2016 guideline, that some materials that are permitted, because of the class in stone, we went with a paver that tried to mimic that stone look, and then repeated that with a very common element that's even mentioned in the 2016 guidelines, which is a split driveway approach. So use that same material in the walkway to the house, and the split driveway, which is an allowed and historically recognized entrance to these to houses. To mimic those, we chose a more a grayish stone color paver with border. So we want to talk about the materiality and the choice there. And then the fourth element that would be repeated across all of the homes, except this piece, except 6 and 7, because 6 and 7 access the fire access gate. So those are the only two exceptions. All the other homes would have a privacy gate as you enter to the private realm of their courtyard and their garage. As you can see in the packet, every house has a different designed gate that mimics the architectural style of those houses. So that's a unique element that plays off of the architectural features of every house, and it's been hand designed, each one of them, by Jason Goddard, who unfortunately had a family vacation out of the country, is why he's not here tonight. And then it was the walkway and the split driveway discussing the materiality. We again chose something to mimic the stone, a lot of the stone of the water table of the houses, but we're open to that. And then the fourth element being the gas lantern at the walkway, and that would be for all 11 homes as well, to be a common repetitive thing where we would place a placard for the addresses. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Elizabeth?
Thank you. So this application was submitted and withdrawn, as mentioned last week, and they've come back with this for lots 2 through 6. So each lot has the following alterations proposed: an additional driveway material to add Teco Block pure paver inserts with a border and EVA slate for a gate pad and a run strip in the driveway. An additional walkway material to be the Teco Block EVA slate paver with a picture frame border, picket fencing near the front of the building and at the rear of each building, a driveway gate for each with a different design on each lot, and a 32-inch tall stone pier with a 28-inch glass lantern in front of each home. So the guidelines recommend the following for driveway materials: to use durable materials that were historically typical for driveways such as gravel, concrete, bricks, and asphalt. As proposed, the use of a paver with the appearance of cobblestone is not a historically typical material for driveways and is not recommended. And for the walkway materials, the following is recommended: to use historic patterns, configurations, widths, and materials. A variety of materials can be seen in the district for walkways, including but not limited to brick, stone, and material with a paver-like appearance. However, the use of pavers or cobblestone is not a historically typical material for walkways, as it is more common to see concrete or brick, and that would appear as more historic for this element. For the picket fencing and gates shown, if you'll go to page 15. A 3-foot tall, 6-inch picket fence is proposed near the front of each building and internally at the rear of each building, with an automated gate and with an inward swing. Each gate features a different design. Some of them on lots, specifically on lot 4 and 5, there's less opacity with the gate, so it's less translucent, and the guidelines do recommend that fencing that is readily visible from the street have a higher degree of opacity to read as front yard fencing. The distance from the front facade of the homes to where the gates and fences are proposed was not included with this application to confirm that this is either front yard or rear yard fencing. So as it stands, it is above 3 foot tall, so if it is rear yard fencing, it is appropriate, but if it's within 20 feet of the primary facade, it would be an inappropriate height for that. So the guidelines state that wooden picket fences are the most common fencing materials for the primary yard. Other appropriate fence materials may include open weave brick design or cast iron. While the picket fencing is appropriate, changes may be needed for the fencing proposed from Lot 5 to 6 and the height in the front, as it exceeds the typical configuration for front yard fencing and does not seem to be aligned with the property line and extends in front of Lot 6 as well. For the stone pier and lantern, the proposal includes a stone pier and lantern in front of each building on the right side of the walkway. The guidelines recommend to use concealed exterior lighting or fixtures common to the building style and period of construction, use small footlights or driveways and walkways instead of large freestanding post-mounted lights, use simple fixtures that appear to scale of the house, place new fixtures in the porch ceiling or adjacent to the main entrance on exterior walls. The use of a stone-mounted lantern in the front yard is not consistent with the guidelines. It is not concealed or common to the style or period in the building in Franklin. The use of a gas lantern is more reflective of the 19th and early 20th century. The repetitive and consistent nature of the proposed element is not seen elsewhere in our historic districts either. One example has been provided in the HPO of a mounted lantern located at the brownstones, but is not seen for each individual unit there as proposed here. While the use of gas lanterns may be appropriate to the age and style of some of the buildings proposed, it is not appropriate for all styles proposed. So currently, the driveway materials, walkway materials, and stone pier and lantern are not in keeping with the guidelines. The picket fencing may be appropriate if at a distance that the height is appropriate. And the gates are appropriate as well with an inward swing. We'd like some feedback on the opacity of the fencing and the gates, specifically the gates.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect, thank you. All right, let's start with columns with the gas lantern. I wrote down most of them, hopefully. Staff can catch us up if I forgot one. So columns with the gas lanterns to the left of the walkway up to each front door. Anybody want to chime in on that? Lisa?
A question, so what's the total number of gas lanterns being proposed? 11.
One for, I believe, we don't have Lot 1 with us. Jason's not here. I know we're going to do the 10. The idea was to do the 10 for every house as a repeating element.
At the sidewalk, because we only have the sidewalk on one side of the street, thankfully. Anyway, so there, where the walkway from the sidewalk that goes up to the front steps of these front porches of all these houses, there's a little column, stone column with a gas lantern at that, with the address of the house on it.
We looked at picket fencing. We looked at landscaping, hedgerow fencing, which would have been allowed. But that seemed to take away some of the elements of the houses. And so we tried to remove almost all of that over here, recess the fencing back to just the gated area, and having a more private, public delineator of some sort was the thought behind this stuff.
Which is what the column accomplishes, that, the delineation, correct?
We believe it gives a representation to individuals. I know City of Franklin has just a handful of examples, but I've spent a lot of time outside of Louisville, Kentucky, their historic district. This technique was used during this time period, not so much here, so we looked to inspiration of, instead of having all these picket fences going down and then the four-rail fence that we're thinking about on the other side, is just a way to soften it and not be, this is where the public is traveling, and just giving them an indicator that, listen, this is a private side. If you continue up this lead walk, most people should know that. It was just an element that we wanted to try to find a balance of creating a segment of that public-private realm. It's so critical to get right. And not to feel overwhelming using, even though permissible material would not have the feel that I think we would all hope for as much time as we've spent on each of these houses.
Okay.
The reason I was mentioning the columns is I was wondering if you had considered the columns with not the gas lanterns particularly, but maybe some underlighting or some other kind of feature instead of the gas lanterns, since that's not consistent with the guidelines.
Well, we just thought it was beautiful and it was appropriate to the period. And so, walking down that sidewalk, I mean, we're trying to create something really special, and we think they're appropriate and beautiful. And so, for what we're trying to do there, so I
It
think
would be a lot less expensive
To do some underlighting.
to do the underlighting.
Right,
We
yeah.
don't think it has the same impact.
Sure.
And uniqueness. Almost all of the houses have some form of a gas hanging lantern on them. The Magnolia house itself also has gas fixtures, and it was just that subtle glow in between the streetlights that we thought could be a touch. There are cheaper options out there that we looked at, but again, we were trying to balance, because I mean, there are permissible solutions here, but we just felt it would busy up these front yards that are not very large. I would argue that as we look down Boyd Mill and then this side of the historic part of Franklin as it's grown up, the houses are set back oftentimes a lot further. And so we're trying to strike that balance.
So there are gas lanterns on the Magnolia house itself?
yes, and
what you're
every one of the new houses will have gas lanterns on each side of the door. So there'll be gas lanterns at the doors, and this smaller gas lantern on this
Gotcha.
short
Staff would
column.
like to clarify that no lighting specifications have been submitted at this time, so no lighting specifications have been approved at this time.
Well, they're on,
Haven't been
they're,
included in any plan so far.
But for
they're on the
this,
plans.
for this item, it's mainly that it's on the column at the walkway.
Right.
Yes, it's recommended to use concealed or small footlights for walkways and driveways.
Yeah, and I keep looking at the site plan, and almost all of them, but not all of them. I think Lot 5's doesn't have one, but most of the walkways have little stone walls as the cheek walls. So my thought, I mean, say if you look at Lot 2, it's got little stone cheek walls on each side of the steps, and then there's a column just a couple feet in front of another stone wall, and it seems like that's a lot going on. Like I said, 5 doesn't have cheek walls shown.
Lot 2, 3, and 4, in the field, we didn't have the vertical separation that we were anticipating.
What do
in
you
the
mean
grades.
vertical separation? It's just
In the
not sitting out
grade.
of the ground very far?
Yeah, so we couldn't put the cheek walls in, so that's coming back in as
Okay,
a revision
okay.
of, they had to remove, that's just so you know.
Okay.
Site condition.
Yeah, my thought is if you've got some cheek walls, part of the architecture of the house or the walkway, use that as an opportunity for lighting. You know, it's, I'm thinking of a bigger kind of higher view picture of this issue, and really, is it more appropriate for all these houses to be kind of unified and have a similar kind of, well, everybody's got a similar stone column and lantern and similar materials for driveway. Part of that helps it look like, oh, this was all built kind of a similar time, and it's not trying to mimic historic. And then part of me is like, well, they're all different styles of architecture. Maybe every house ought not have the exact same thing, which you sort of nodded to with your gates, which we'll get to in a minute. So with that view looking down, I'm thinking, well, should they all have the same column, first of all? I'm not sure that the guidelines say that it's appropriate to have this column in the front. I think it talks about, I guess, you can have something that's a certain height and a certain kind of lighting, so that's appropriate within the guidelines. But it says it's a 28-inch tall lantern on a 32-inch column, so that's 60 inches tall. That's a whopper. And you said these are the small fixtures. They're bigger on the house?
No, we were just saying these are,
They're 6 feet on the house.
they're,
It's a big, it's a big thing to be up at the sidewalk. And, you know, I kept thinking, okay, what else goes in front yards that are, I mean, people put brick or stone mailboxes, but they're up on the road. They're not in your front yard, so they're usually in some right-of-way of some sort. So I'm trying to make it make sense in my mind, and it hasn't quite yet. Not that it's wouldn't be pretty, but I'm not sure that it makes it feel like it belongs in a historic neighborhood. And there's some precedent in town. I don't know how old some of those are. Some of them don't look original, some do.
Actually, the
but-
507 South Margins is a 21st century house.
Yeah. So it's
And it is not located in the historic preservation overlay, so those weren't reviewed.
right. So did you have something, Madeline?
Well, I was just going to say, if it were to be approved, I would definitely like to see a smaller,
Oh, yeah.
simpler style of fixture. But wanted to get past how or if it meets the guidelines first.
Yeah, I think the guidelines would allow for a 3-foot tall
Column.
with concealed type lighting. Am I thinking
Almost
correctly?
like a eyeball type light.
Yeah,
with-
something
for
mounted on the
concealed-
side or something simple.
I think in the example for the lighting is just small foot lights. So there's not necessarily something that speaks to putting, other than like a post-mounted light, this is what that is. So
Right.
anything post-mounted would not be recommended for lighting walkways and pathways.
Right, okay.
That's true in old guidelines and new. We don't do post-mounted lights in front yards. Okay. Brian?
My thought, to piggyback with Tyler and everyone else, I think they're a little redundant. A little redundant for the neighborhood where you have a architectural diversity of style, and then I know you want to have this unifying column, but it's very redundant. I think the guidelines probably speak better to that in another way to light the sidewalk. And I'd like you to explore maybe something a little more subtle than what's being proposed.
And to what Tyler mentioned earlier, each house is different, each gate is different. So this being the one consistent thing, I think it would actually make more sense that they would each be lit their own specific way.
Yeah, and in my mind, if there was one particular style or something that lend itself towards having a little column out there, then it might be a one-off, but to have one at each one. And then I keep thinking about picket fence or any type of front yard fencing. It's like, well, there's different styles of that too. Guidelines talk about metal fencing, so one house could have a metal fence around the front yard. That's a lower fence, meets the guidelines. And another one could be a wood picket fence that meets the guidelines. And some could have no fence in the front and meet the guidelines. So it's, like I said, I'm thinking of it kind of 30,000 foot view. Like, should these all be the same? What's most appropriate? And organically, as our historic districts have grown and were planted 100 years ago, people had different stuff. And then they've developed over time with different stuff too. So I think I'm leaning towards each one having some unique thing about it. Yeah. Do you have something, Lisa? Okay.
I agree with you.
Okay. So let's talk about, there's a couple different pavers here. I see some pink ones, that are walkway pavers, and it's running, it's sort of creating the idea that we've got this split driveway thing. But it's not actually like grass split driveway. It's a paver in the middle, and then whatever our other paving product is the yellow. Is that correct?
So, okay, you're talking about the actual submission, not the examples? Sorry.
Yeah, we're looking
I
at the
was
site
catching up
plan
with you.
here. I'm just trying to understand
Yes, so there.
where everything is.
Yeah, understood. So each of these are looking at having a repetitive, again, that was the initial approach. We're taking feedback, obviously. So the driveway and the lead walkway would match. And it would be a paver. We've saw a bunch of examples around town of different types of pavers. Obviously, you also have cobblestone, you obviously have brick, you also have pea gravel on West Main. There's one as I was driving here, I saw, actually into the office this morning, I saw. So lots of different, grass is another one, gravel's another one. So there are a lot of different options. We, again, had a vision of having the common elements that would not be unreasonable, and then having unique elements. And so just trying to find the blend of what could work through that.
Okay. So at this site plan image, pink is all the same paver. Yellow's a different paver?
It's concrete.
That's concrete, okay. And then this green, blue, that aligns with the path to the
And
park.
that's the decomposed granite across
Okay.
the street. And then the pink walkway is the same as the driveway.
Okay, just the center of the
walk.
driveway and
Yeah,
the
the lead-
apron around the gate.
That's right. And
Okay.
an apron around the gate. So
Okay.
all of that was proposed as same material.
What's
repeated.
the purple?
The purple's the sidewalk,
What's it material though?
concrete.
Okay,
So it's the same as the yellow.
okay, understood.
There's a lot of colors there. Thank you for clarifying.
Well,
that.
I want to make sure that I've understood what your thinking goes where.
You don't like that Pepto-Bismol pink?
Hey, it reads well. You know, the guidelines talk about really three materials, if I recall. It's like stone, brick, and concrete. Yes. Your pavers, are you needing those for some reason for like stormwater calcs or anything that we don't know
No,
about?
we
Okay.
know like Vandalia Court used them for, just down the road from us. That was a stormwater element.
Requirement, yeah.
But a lot of the stuff down West Main, Boyd, Fair Park, and Ledge Lawn, not all of those met or needed the
Okay.
stormwater requirements.
The only one I recall reviewing and approving fairly recent is one that's in here. It's stone, right there in the bottom right, 419. And we did have some discussion about that, and
It's kind of like a cobblestone-ish.
yeah, it is. And I think what was appealing about it is that it's still stone, which meets the guidelines. It's not very common for driveways in Franklin, but because the guidelines talk about stone for walkways and things, we thought it was maybe an upgrade from concrete, right? But the other pavers, from what I remember, and these commissioners next to me have been here longer than I have not been looked at as favorable, just because they are a little more, what's the word? Maybe too consistent, too regular, the shapes, things like that. And that's why the guidelines really read as brick, stone, or concrete. And then there's some different mixes of concrete, which are better than others in terms of color and texture and things. But when I look at the paver that you submitted, it's a very consistent, modern kind of cut to the paver. And so I don't think it meets what the guidelines are trying to achieve with that much
In the
regularity.
In the 2016 guidelines, there's an example of like with gravel, too. And then on West Main, there's several examples of gravel being in the
Yeah,
middle.
is gravel,
permissible?
Gravel is mentioned as a permissible material.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So that's, yeah.
I was just,
Yeah.
you didn't mention gravel. I was-
And the only gravel you've got is the walkway to the park,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, understood.
Okay, yeah.
And we used cobblestone at Arlington in front of the two doors. That was, I think it was irregular. I mean, it was obviously bought cobblestone, but it was, it was about this thick and it was,
Yeah. I think the concrete pavers that are in 3 of those 4 pictures is not as in keeping with the guidelines as the one that 419 Boyd Mill used, or a brick paver. We've had even discussions about is brick appropriate on some houses,
that's what he
just
submitted.
because, historically there's been concrete there, and most of the guidelines say to maintain those, and so we've had people try and replace. This is all new, so I think in that case, brick could be appropriate, real stone, gravel where you've got it, or concrete. And, concrete would have been the most common and most appropriate for era home or period homes all around town, in most towns. Anything?
Just quickly, because Tyler, that was very thorough. I appreciate it. Again, the setting here is very different. And so the balance between something that's historically appropriate with this new development, which we want to be consistent, but at the same time, not trying to replicate anything. I think the brick would try to do that, whereas the stone, as pictured in 419, in combination with concrete, is a good balance.
And I was just thinking about the mansion too, and do we know what, I think the porch, the recessed porch on the mansion, that's concrete. Is that
The recessed board on the back?
on the front of the house?
On the
I mean,
front,
it's got the 2 rooms that protrude and the porch.
that porch
recessed
is
in.
wood.
Okay. Well, that's where my thought process is going
And
is
the
walkway.
walkway is brick,
Okay.
and then their
Pea gravel.
driveway is pea gravel.
Where I'm headed with this is I don't think all this new ought to be more ornamented when it comes to these site features
Yeah.
than the mansion is,
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
yeah.
Right.
So,
Those
so
good-
what are you proposing for the drive at the mansion?
It's it wants to be
It's
pea
going to
gravel.
stay pea gravel?
It's
Pea
gonna stay
gravel.
Okay.
Yeah,
Probably a tar and chip pea gravel, just to help
Keep
move
it
it
from
around.
sliding
Yeah.
around everywhere?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know how pea gravel is. I know, traditionally, I mean, you talk about traditionally, I mean, even concrete. I mean, that would have been early, maybe 1920s, 30s. You've got concrete work going on here. Earlier than that, you'd probably seen some macadamized,
yeah.
compressed gravel
Yeah.
type thing. And, I realize we're talking about a 21st century development where you want it to look nice and you want to have nice drives that don't require, inordinate maintenance and all that. So I get that. It's tough with where the guidelines are concerned. I would say that traditionally brick is used for sidewalks, the sidewalk to the house. And if you could find a way to do that with your houses, I mean, that would meet the guidelines. I mean, that would not even hardly be a discussion about material because you've got it. Where the driveways are concerned, to have a different material like the cobblestone look, I mean, aesthetically, and when I imagine all that, I think, well, that makes a nice development as you drive through it. It looks good. Then you have to consider the guidelines. We have approved cobblestone and a cobblestone look before. So maybe something that looks more cobblestone-like than is the geometrical perfect pattern that we just saw, like
Right.
in that drive. That might be a more appropriate
Right.
type of product for that. But
Right.
I get where you're going with that.
Okay.
And it would, I think it would be attractive in the neighborhood. It's not a historic home. If they were coming to us, we were talking about a 19th century house and talking about, you know, the stamped concrete, you know, I'd say, well, clearly not a part of the guidelines. But we're talking about a 21st century house.
Right.
So, you know, I'm weighing the balance
Yeah.
of what it is.
And I think, you know, the tire strip nod to that. I don't know if you totally need it. Like I said, it's an additional detail that's nice, but it can start to get busy
Yes.
against the mansion, which is pea gravel.
Yes.
So, you know, a way to maybe spruce it up is do your apron, the part that flares out right before it hits William Campbell, do it in stone or whatever your accent is, concrete up to the apron at the gates and do it there, but maybe not the strip, because now you got a bunch of materials kind of, you know, piano keying across the front of the yards of these where you got A, B, A, B, A, B all the way down. Just trying to simplify it, I think, is a good thing. But I think you're on the right track with some use of some different materials. I think if you can get in the guidelines and use ones that can be supported, makes everybody's life easier. And I still think it can look really nice.
Thank you.
Driveway we talked about.
Gate.
Gates. And then staff's asked us specifically to think about opacity. Some of them have more solid panels on the bottom. I
It's
think that was
really-
lots 5 and 6, maybe?
They were really
6 and
trying
7.
to mimic the 4-rail fence, right?
Well, no, Jason was trying to look at each architectural and give a nod to the style. And, you know, it was, without being repetitive, going back to a comment you made earlier, that was actually, from the gate perspective, a way to carry that over and let it blend in. So I think as you guys go through this, you'll see a lot of, Jason spent a ton of time thinking through and trying to, how do I complement the house for this entry to keep it subtle? So I think specifically lots 5 and 6 were the opacity concerns. In particular because we did have some paneling, but we tried to limit it so that you can see that paneling element there while not trying to be redundant.
Yeah. Brian, do you have some thoughts on that?
Well, just, staff's already spoken to that. Well, you know, you could do some piercing work in those panels. That would give you a little bit more openness. That would be one thing. But I, you know, from what I see in the drawings, I do see a lot of consideration of the architecture of the house. They're not all the same. You give some variety to it. It meets the guidelines that the gates swing inward, that the right height, the change in pattern. I mean, from what I see, they meet the guidelines.
I know lot 6, there's some concern between lot 5 and 6 because the house of William Campbell to swing out away from the historic mansion. We really struggled with how to make that work. Could y'all look at that a little bit? So I know staff had questions for us, and it's a little unique. You're trying not to enter the front facades, but you can see here in just a second the challenge that we're up against.
Yeah. Yeah, where it has to jog back with the road.
And we have to have enough room on the house side for the equipment to, there we go.
Live behind the fence.
Yeah. And so you can see how the courtyard moved up.
Yeah, so if you move the gate back and, yeah, maybe it aligns there, but can you, once you cross the driveway, bring the fence up to the 20-foot point?
We can evaluate. We didn't know how
Look
big
at
of
it.
a deal, because we were going to be you can't make a decision on landscaping, but we're coming in with softening that a little bit. But I mean, there are options. We can,
Yeah.
we just needed to get some feedback from the panel.
Yeah, the tough part is, I think, what you proposed is a certain height fence, and once it jumps on to the other property line, well, it has to be 20 feet behind the front facade to
That's
go
right.
over the 3 feet. So it's like,
We meet it
think
on
about
our
how you
side.
might contend with
Okay,
that.
got it.
There's, like you said, there's more to it than just moving the fence. So look at moving the fence, but look at all the other stuff that has to be done to make that happen.
Understood.
Yeah, I think the gates, I like the aesthetic of them. Fine. I think there was some height concern just based on, are they 20 feet from the front plane of the house or not?
We will provide
double check that.
dimensions for the distance from the front of the house. That'll make it a lot easier for
Okay.
everybody.
It's just hard to tell from these elevations, but yeah, they're back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. In the site plan, if it's dimensioned, then we
Yep.
just know.
Understood.
Lisa, did you have any other thoughts on the gates?
No, I agree with everything that's been said.
Okay.
Okay.
Is there anything else on the list on this one?
If it's 20 feet behind the rear yard or the front plane and it meets the guidelines, it can be administratively reviewed and approved as well.
Okay.
That's a consideration. But I think. we
Doesn't
did
that
good.
sound nice?
I've never heard that before in 25 years.
Well,
So
Bernie, we're
knew
trying to
that-
teach you something.
I knew there was an administrative thing, but I was like, I didn't
Yeah.
know. I was
But
like,
but if it's going to be part of your package, bring it before us, and that way we
Yeah.
vote on it and it's done.
yeah.
Well, I just like talking to you guys.
Well, we know. All right, anything else that we can give you feedback on?
No.
You guys good?
Thank
Okay.
y'all very
Thank you
much.
very much. Thanks. All right, item number 4, discussion of roofing material and alterations at 230 Franklin Road, the factory. And I don't see Benton. Introduce me.
This is Reed Talley, Holiday Properties.
Thank you, Reed. All right, if you want to give us a quick rundown here, and then we'll hear from Emily with staff comments.
Yep, just a handful of things. We were asked to come back with more information on roofing materials. And so this is what we're proposing. What we showed last time is this galvulum. It's the same thing. This is just the weathered version of it. Here you go, Emily. Spoke with the manufacturer, and it'll take a few years for it to weather to something like that. But that's essentially what we're proposing and what we'd like to stick with. The last page in this document has side-by-side comparisons with these on the existing roof. And so it's a pretty good match. It weathers to a patina. It's pretty good match. This is the same brick. I just brought it just because it was around and for adjacency. Same one that we
Okay.
already have approved. Additionally, we have gutter and downspout locations on here. On the elevations, we're proposing the same material. It's found around campus now. We are also, let's see, if you can go to the, right here. Small window change, not the cube, but the architectural metal paneling to the right of it, to the north of it. We have 4 windows beneath it on the ground level. That's a change. That's our fitness room, and so we just added more windows by changing the shape of those windows, and so just wanted to note that. And then the last item is we have placed our kitchen hood exhaust. It is towards it's towards the front right here. We're not proposing a dark material. We're proposing the same material that'll weather and help it blend in. Originally, we were hoping to keep keep those exposed. There is, all around the factory, we have these exposed hoods, and it felt natural. But as we understand, this is a zoning item, not a approval item, and so we added that enclosure screening around it with the same material to patina and let it just disappear.
Okay,
So that's it.
thank you. All right, Miss Emily.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 230 Franklin Road is located in the Franklin Road Historic District and is individually listed on the National Register of Historic Places. This site is known as the Factory at Franklin. And based on the application, staff has reviewed the roofing material, gutters and downspouts, and the mechanical screening on the approved new hotel building. Staff did not review the change to the window elements on the building. For the proposed roofing, a Galvalume material that has a finish that will wear off after a period of time is proposed. And once the finish has worn off, the metal roofing, it will blend with the color of the existing roofing that is seen around the factory campus. The application shows the existing gutters and downspouts in a silver color and a dark color that are existing on the campus. The guidelines recommend to use roofing materials that are typical and complement the architectural style of the building, matching the gutter style to the architectural style of the building. Some of the buildings were constructed in the late 1920s and were constructed throughout the years as different manufacturers utilized the site. The existing profile of the gutters are square shaped, and so we appreciate feedback from the DRC on the appropriate color of the gutters and the downspouts. And for the mechanical equipment, it's proposed on the hotel building, and it is required to, in order to accommodate this equipment, the mechanical screening is required by the zoning ordinance. More information is needed to determine if the proposed screening material is appropriate, as the zoning ordinance requires rooftop screening to be dark in color, and it is proposed to match the silver color of the roof. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Anyone want to start us?
I have a question.
Kalisa?
So we're talking about a corrugated metal roofing? No.
Standing seam metal.
And thank you for bringing the samples in. That's very helpful. It seems perfectly appropriate from what I'm looking at regarding the samples. And as far as the gutters go, they're going to age as well. It's the same metal. And so that too, I think, is consistent with the rest of the factory. The fan or the vent or whatever it is, it's hard to tell from the rendering just how visible it's going to be. Something in black or contrasting metal seems as though it would make it stand out even more. So I would favor, just for the consistency factor, to remain with the metal that you have.
Okay.
The elevation shows that we were able to make the change to the color on the elevation, but not the renderings. One more, yep, right here. So this shows it with a matching roof, and that's what we kind of want. It's kind of fade away, and so that's what we're hoping as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Brian?
I agree with Lisa. I wanted to ask you on, I think it was asked about the shape of the gutters. So I'm assuming most of the gutters at the factory are a square type
that's
of
right.
gutter.
That's
It
right.
does look more industrial.
Right.
So I don't see how that goes against the guidelines. It looks like it goes with the guidelines. The screening, I agree with Lisa, over time, it will blend with the roof, and it will be a darker color. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I concur with everything the other two folks have said. I think they had mentioned downspouts too. There's some galvanized and there's some painted kind of bronze on the factory. I don't have a big preference there, except that, you know, if it's coming off of the galvanized roof and then you're going to have a galvanized gutter, it's probably a galvanized downspout. I'm thinking of what you all call the marquee canopy, you know, it's going to have a bunch of steel under it. If that ends up being bronze or something, that may be a spot that you need a one-off color of some sort, but we'll let you tell us where and how many and what kind, and then we'll review it. But, you know, just kind of a common sense approach on that makes sense. So,
As far as the zoning goes and the screening, is that something that needs, that they can, that the HZC can approve a color change for that, or how does that work?
We'll have to look into that to see, and we'll have to have conversations with our zoning administrator to confirm.
yeah.
To Tyler's point, yeah, I mean, or Brian's, I guess that can classify as a dark color, right?
It gets darker.
Is it, right?
You know, it's kind of like the copper conversation we
Right.
had earlier. It's like, well, give it enough time, and
Right.
and it'll, yeah. And if the answer's no, then we'll have to discuss
Right.
something else.
It resembles the factory. I mean, if you have if you paint a dark screening, as Lisa said, it is going to stick out,
Yeah.
and that's not what we want.
Right.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Oh, just one more thing, the
ma'am.
windows, we didn't touch on that. Was that something, Emily, that you?
Staff did not review those,
Uh-huh.
as it wasn't called out. We just reviewed the roofing, the downspouts, and the mechanical screening.
Okay.
Will you show us where it's at again? It's,
Yeah,
Under-
next sheet.
yeah, right there.
North right, just above her cursor. It's those 4 windows
On the ground
on the
floor.
ground level.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, at first glance, they seem
Can.
consistent with what we've seen.
Right.
You know, if it when it comes to a voting meeting, just maybe zoom in and say it's same spec as these, and
Right.
you know, we paid real close attention to the kind of, here's a factory window,
Right.
and here's this window and a scale, but these are even smaller than some that we've already reviewed. So looks like the center panel of the second floor. It looks like it has a wider mole. It's like one of those transplanted. So any
Just wanted to point out that there was a change made, and so we're happy to
Okay.
tackle that any way we need to. But while we're here, worth talking about and bringing up.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, item number 5, discussion of new construction at 1845 William Campbell Court, Magnolia Hall, Lot 7. Jennifer Lombard. Hello.
Hi, guys. So based on the feedback that we got, I think at last week's voting meeting, we wanted to kind of focus on making a few changes to the right front corner of this property.
Okay. Go ahead, I'm counting.
Okay. So we were really just, I think we felt good about the feedback on the rest of the house. It was just that right front corner that was causing some concern. So we pushed back the kind of glassed-in porch element to get it off that front corner, and we also really reduced the height and pushed back that gable on the right side as well. So that's now a single-story element that kind of nestles in there. So we've kind of opened up that corner. But those were the 2 changes that we'd love to get y'all's feedback on.
Okay. Elizabeth.
And thank you for returning for another DRC as requested when the item was deferred during the July Historic Zoning Commission meeting, and incorporating feedback heard at that meeting and also the condition of approval that staff had for moving that window over on the right elevation. The issues that were addressed and the massing of the front right solarium enclosure was reduced and set back further, creating an appearance of an addition over time. Additionally, one item that staff would like to address is the delineation of the foundation, as it's not seen on the massing and the facades where its primary primarily brick. So where it's uses siding, there is some delineation, but where it's all brick, there isn't. So it'd be an additional, that was a condition of approval previously to further delineate that. But other than that, there's no additional feedback at this time.
Okay, thank you. Brian, will you start us off?
Yeah, I
Thank
think,
you.
I think you've done a great job in making it more meet the guidelines and seeing something more that may be historically that developed over time. The one thing I think that would add even more of that to it is that if you lost the transom windows in the sunroom and brought your roof line up under your gabled roof, I think historically you would have seen it more like that. So when the water came off, then it hit the lower roof and then comes off. Or, I don't know, I hate to say raise that gable a little bit, but I mean, I think that would give you, that way you don't have to create that, I guess that's a cricket that actually runs up into the brick wall in order to break that water off that roof.
It does tuck just right barely under.
It
Yeah.
does tuck under?
Yeah, those two, I mean, I think that gable roof is gonna run down onto that roof.
So the gable roof does run down onto,
Correct.
huh, because I don't see that in the drawing.
Well, in the side elevation, yeah, I think what you're saying, Brian, is that the actual fascia would go under the fascia.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
not that much separation, but the roof would.
Because right now, the fascia's above the side-facing gable.
Yes.
Just barely. It's 8 inches above it. I'm looking at the side elevation here on
Yeah, I see that on that.
the actual,
That was just a
2D.
suggestion. I know there's been a lot of revisions on this. Tucking that back up under made a lot of a difference. And I know you've lost some space already in that room. What are the ceiling heights of that sunroom?
We're at 10 feet,
10 feet.
yeah,
yeah.
for the whole first floor, which I
Okay.
think is typical of all of these properties.
So that was just my suggestion. Thank you.
Lisa?
Just well done. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I think the adjustment to that side-facing gable helped. I'm sure it was valuable space, but it makes a big difference on the exterior, that kind of massing. It is obviously, or it's obvious now that there's a center kind of core architecture and then some things added to it. So that's better. And those front corners being exposed kind of equally on each side of that brick mass helps a ton. So thank you for that. Trying to think, that foundation delineation, you've got the notes on that. That's,
We
I
had
don't
intended to do
suspect
that.
you have any objection to that.
No, just didn't
Um,
have time to fix it
Yeah,
before this
okay,
resubmit.
understood. I agree with Brian on the transoms, and I think even Mary had some comments last time about sort of the length of some of the openings on these two anterooms. She was talking specifically about the screen porch, maybe not having a lower panel, but it just being screened to the bottom. I'm indifferent to that. I'm not sure how the other two feel about that. But the transoms in this sunroom, it's not inappropriate for every style, right? We've seen conservatory type additions that have transoms, but they're maybe a Georgian revival or something. This, I think the front of this looks somewhat federal-ish, but the transoms probably weren't as common on that porch. And the more we can make it look like it was just a porch that was enclosed in simply, I think the better off it will come off. Anything else?
I defer to the architect here.
I would say, just a comment on the panels in the sunroom, it's just a practicality matter.
Sure.
That if people are going to, not the sunroom, but it's on the left side,
The screen
the
porch.
screen porch. If people are going to use that, it adds a degree of privacy.
somewhere to put
that's-
outlets and all kinds of
Yeah,
things.
that's just the practicality of it. I mean, and I think it would be fine on this house.
Yeah, yeah, I'm indifferent to it. I see the necessity. And we've seen where sometimes there's panels on two walls but not on the other because you want the transparency to your pool or whatever. Again, I'm indifferent to it, whatever makes sense for you all.
Sorry. I think that was the intent here, is we had it open to the pool on that backside, but since that's a corner that's facing the street,
Yeah.
we would like to keep panels there if we can, just for privacy, to your point, Brian.
And especially this lot, your car's turned driving at that corner. So I get it. And it's a headlight thing too. So, all right. Anything else we can comment on for you specifically?
That was the pieces that we wanted feedback on.
Okay.
I think y'all were supportive of everything else, so it was just that corner.
Perfect. Thank you
Thanks,
so
y'all.
much.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Item 6, discussion of a preliminary historic zoning commission recommendation for a mixed-use development and modification of standards at 318 Franklin Road, which has been renamed Harpeth Village, I believe. Come on up. Good evening. Thank you. If you give us your names, we'll get started.
Sure. My name is Drake. I'm a landscape architect and urban planner at Gamble Design Collaborative. And
Okay.
joining me is Meredith from 906, who's our superstar architect. So you are correct. We have chosen a name with the city. Sorry, Mike. We have chosen a name with the city, Harpeth Village. So that is the official name going forward. We feel like it really encapsulates what we're trying to do here in this development. So we'll try to stick to what's changed. We're excited to share with you all the changes we have based on our previous plan that you've seen last. Just to hit on this slide a little bit, I wanted to give you all a precedent of what the city shows in Envision Franklin. These are images the city shows, is what the factory district is and what it entails, just to kind of hit some of that. We can go to the next. And the main thing on this slide is red being the historic preservation overlay. So you can see how some of the parcels, this is a weird development in which we're kind of split. Half of it's an HPO, half of it's not. Similar to what we did at the Hill property where we kind of pulled them apart. But you go on to the next slide. So what we heard, based on our Historic Zoning Commission, we tried to take a lot of the comments you had, comments such as too much mass adjacent to Morningside, larger buffer area, massing scale considerations throughout the whole development, and then preserving the character of the area. And so if you look on the next slide, you can see kind of a side-by-side comparison of what we did to try to address a lot of these concerns. Big things wanted to point out was the distances from both Morningside, the building that's adjacent to it, and then also our new commercial building. So you can see previously we were around 33 feet from the edge of our building to the building of Morningside, not the property line, but the actual building. Now we are 176 feet to the edge outside of the HPO, and then 73 feet on the most southern edge. And it's not on here, but the distance between the northeastern corner of the house and that new commercial building is 143 feet. It's later on in the packet. So we've drastically pulled everything away from that area. We've created some open space that allows us to create a buffer. You can see there on the right. A couple of other things we did. We broke up the buildings a little bit more. Previously, it was one large, massive building. So we've broken it up into two smaller buildings. We've also broken up that building, Building 2, as it's called there, this along the train tracks. Previously, it was 277 feet. Now we're at 200 feet. For context, these buildings have always been kind of inspired by Jameson Station. Jameson Station, that's a straight building there along the front, is 250 feet. So we're 50 feet shorter than that building at Jameson. So the other piece is the commercial building. The half that faces Morningside is 1 story, and the other half that faces towards the train tracks is 2 stories. So we're trying to step up scale, and Meredith will get to that a little later on. We rotated that northern building just to create an access point as you're coming in. We feel like it's a great feature that as you're coming in from Harpeth Industrial, it becomes kind of a focal point. We've reduced the building height. The other thing we've done since we've been there, since we've been in front of y'all, is we went to the historic battlefield, or the Battlefield Commission, and they are excited about what we're doing in preserving the park, and they want to work with us to really tell the story of what happened here at Franklin. So they are excited about that park, and just wanted y'all to know we have initiated those conversations and started some of those conversations about how we can work together to do that. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Meredith to talk about some height stuff.
So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the heights, because I know last time, if you can go to the next slide, there you go. There was discussions about the comparison between this property and Main Street in Franklin in particular. So if you can see the height, we just have a few buildings. Gray's is 40 feet, Tzatziki's is 42 feet, Mellow Mushroom is 40 feet. And then the building closest to us, which is Harpeth Square, the hotel is 52 feet 6. I know that's kind of facing Second. And then the multifamily portion facing Main Street is actually 41 feet for the 3-story portion, and then steps up from there. So, and then also the new City Hall is 53 feet to kind of the peak of that. So that's kind of our comparison here to the heights along Main Street. So now we're showing our building. We have brought the height down a little bit. We are 44 foot 2, and this is the longer building, building 2, that Drake was discussing earlier. And then we're around 48 feet to the top of that parapet at the corner. And you can see some images of the comparisons that I spoke about. The 3-story portion of Harpeth Square, 41 feet, the hotel being 52 feet 6, and then some of the other buildings, the Ruby Sunshine building facing the square, 45 feet, and New City Hall being 53 feet. So we feel like we're right in there amongst those buildings and Main Street and kind of the main district of downtown Franklin. And then if you can go to the next slide, please. I know there also were a bunch of questions of all the buildings and the heights. The northernmost mixed-use building, 39 foot 2, which is the ridge height, again, right in there. The center building, like I described, we actually, just in kind of stepping and pushing and pulling the architecture, the very central portion is 46 foot 10, and then on the corner it's 48 foot 10, and then kind of the median is that 44 foot height. And then you can see that the building that we made a smaller commercial building next to Morningside Drive, or the closest building to Morningside Drive, and the 1-story portion is only 22 feet to the top of the parapet, and 32 foot 6 for the half of the building that kind of steps up 1 story. So I know there were also some questions about the location of the retaining wall on the property, and we just wanted to point that out, that is shown in blue here and highlighted. It's kind of behind the hill in the preserved park where we have retaining walls. The remainder, and kind of the entrance road and everything, that'll have some parallel parking, but we don't foresee any retaining walls kind of at that entry road, and that's why it's located where it is and kind of going around the hill to hopefully kind of stay on the low side and not need any retaining walls. And then you can kind of see some open plaza areas versus where our buildings are as well. Next slide, please. So now we're going to show some of our updated architectural imagery. You can see on the first slide, we're showing kind of grayed out the building for context that's not in the historic zoning overlay. But you can kind of see looking north towards the smaller mixed-use building, as well as the new commercial building with the 1-story stepping up to 2 stories. And then the building to the bottom is showing the northernmost mixed-use building. Next slide, please. And then you can see the architecture in the bottom of the 1-story retail and the 2-story that will have office on the second level, and how much smaller that scale is compared to what we showed you guys previously. All right, next slide. So this is just a different angle, looking from the north to the south of the site, showing that 2-story volume, stepping down to 1-story. Next slide. The next slide shows, we actually took out the roundabout in the center as well and just have like a 4-way intersection there. And again, shows that changing architecture. The top image also shows how we kind of broke up this center building, building 2, a little bit more. You can start to see it in that image. And this shows 2 different angles of our new retail building as well. Next slide. We showed a lot of imagery here. Again, this shows building 2. This shows more of that building in the image to on the bottom side, so you can see how that's broken up. Next slide. So the bottom building shows, I think this really shows how much we've reduced the scale and the massing of the center of the site. You can see the 1-story retail volume, and then we've created a little park out there and some parking. And then you can see the multifamily building really is pulled back pretty far from where we had it before. And it also shows the image in the top starts to show the roof for the house at Morningside Drive and kind of the commercial volume and as it reads through the trees there. There was also a comment of wanting to see more of the elevation of building 2 and kind of how that massing is broken up. So, and how that central element was reduced. So we thought that more of an elevation view was more appropriate here. Next slide. This one is our comparison. This is the same view that you guys saw before of Morningside Drive, which you can see that house to the right-hand side, on the bottom without trees, on the top with trees. And then you can see the distances. You see the grayed out building in the background, and you can kind of see the distance to that 1-story retail. And that's the 143 feet that Drake was describing earlier. And there's that distance on the next slide. You can kind of see the imagery, you know, of the house through the trees. And Drake is going to talk a little bit about the modification of standard for signage.
Yeah, we were asked to include this, so I wanted to hit it at a high level to understand what we're trying to do with this development and get some input from you guys on thoughts of how we can move forward. The first one being proportion and shape. This is a common one, I think, that's come up a lot because of the zoning ordinance reads that it has to be it cannot be a regular shape, so it can't match the logo of the tenants in the building. So we would like the flexibility to be able to do that. And we understand that all of these are modifications to be able to ask for this, that this would have to come back, correct me if I'm wrong, Emily, this would have to come back for COA with a full signage package for final approval, and this is just allowing us to be able to present to you something that's not allowed in the zoning ordinance. Did I get that right? Okay. So that's modification 1. Modification 2 is for halo lighting, potential for LED. We feel like in this situation behind the hill where you can't see the buildings, if we keep it in an area such as the tenants in the floor where you won't be able to see it, we feel like it could be appropriate in this particular instance, but would welcome your input on that. You can go to the next one. Modification number 3. Currently, you are allowed 1 sign per canopy per building facade. We'd like the ability to introduce those signs for each of the tenants, and you can see it in our rendering that's in the middle there of how we do have those signages for each of the tenants. It would be on the ground floor, commercial buildings, mixed-use buildings. It also doesn't, the ordinance reads that it can't project above or below. We would like the ability to be able to project it above. That's how our renderings have shown it, and you can see some of the images down there on the last 2 bottom page that shows that. And then within this also canopy sign is the ability to do some internal illumination. It's once again thinking that not visible Franklin Road is hidden, that it might be appropriate in this certain instance. And then modification 4, I think is the last one. This one is to allow a blade sign, even though if there's other signs on the facade. I think the building, the First Horizon Bank downtown does a great job of tastefully having both. And I think with the development, branding, but also having these individual tenants that need to be able to last in their placemaking there, that we felt like it was appropriate to be able to ask for that modification. I think that's everything.
Okay. Let's hear from Emily.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The property at 318 Franklin Road is within the Franklin Road Local Historic District. A cultural resources report on the property identified that the only Civil War era feature that remains within the project site is the hilltop lunette, which was recommended to be conserved. The proposal to develop the property has come to several DRC meetings to receive feedback on the design, and then attended the June Historic Zoning Commission, where the proposal received a recommendation of denial. A revised plan is before the DRC today. First, I want to hit on the height. The height of the proposed buildings range in height from 22 feet to 48 feet 10 inches. The height of the proposed buildings has decreased since the previous proposal that ranged from 25 feet 6 inches to 54 feet 10 inches. The guidelines do recommend designing the height of new buildings to be consistent with the height of historic commercial buildings in the district, which should not exceed 2 to 3 stories or be any taller than the commercial buildings on Main Street. And those span from Fifth Avenue North to, 5th Avenue North to 4th Avenue North, and then right here and it cuts off at the public square. Additionally, the guidelines recommend transitioning the height of new buildings to be within 10% of the height of any adjacent historic building through the use of building stepbacks of 20 feet from the stories below, dividing the building into smaller parts to reduce the effective visual bulk. The provided heights of the 3 historic commercial buildings are 40 feet, 40 feet, and 42 feet. The proposed heights of the new buildings exceed the heights of the existing commercial buildings on Main Street. The building closest to Morningside Drive has been shifted so that the space between the new building and the building on Morningside Drive has a space of 176 feet between the two and is now located outside of the historic preservation overlay. The building also has a space of 73 feet from the rear of the existing building on Morningside Drive and the new building. For the massing and scale, the length of the building closest to the railroad tracks has decreased in length from the previous submittal. The previous center building was a length of 277 feet, and the new center building length is 200 feet. The guidelines recommend the following for building forms for new construction. One should align the architectural features of the new building with those of nearby historic buildings. Respect the streetscape character by creating compatible patterns and rhythms of architectural features along the street. Reinforce the appearance and rhythm of historic horizontal patterns by maintaining a distinction between the street level and upper floor facades on buildings of 2 or more stories. Reinforce the appearance and rhythm of historic vertical divisions to maintain consistent facade widths. Maintain traditional rhythm and spacing patterns created by the massing of historic buildings along the street. And new commercial construction in this context should be sensitive to rear adjacent historic residential structures. While additional information is needed to determine if the proposed buildings meet the guidelines recommendation for building form, the proposed form appears to have a massing that is inconsistent with the buildings that are seen on Franklin Road. For the hardscape features and site elements, the plan does reflect the installation of 2 retaining walls to the north of the plan that will be closest to the church property. And on this image, it is shown in the kind of bluish teal color. Information on the height or length of these walls have not been provided at this time, and it is unknown whether these walls will be visible from Franklin Road. For other hardscape that is proposed, there will be several plaza areas around the building. There will also be 3 locations for stormwater ponds. One will be fronting Franklin Road. The other 2 will be located to the north of the property, close to the neighboring church. Additionally, there will be on-street parking skirting around the base of the hill, and it is shown on this image in pink. The parking will be seen from Franklin Road on both sides of the street. The guidelines recommend minimizing the visual impact of parking by locating parking areas behind buildings and using landscaping or walls to further screen parking from off-site. The proposed parallel parking around the base of the hill as proposed does not meet the guidelines. For the architectural elements, the proposed architectural is very industrial and relates to some of the features of the historic factory at Franklin site, to which this development is currently not connected. The proposal does not appear to be sensitive to adjacent historic buildings. The proposed architecture is an abrupt change from the architecture seen on the adjacent mid-century modern buildings and the reconstructed 1928 farmhouse on Morningside Drive. The use of dark red/brown brick, black metal paneling, a metal connector piece connecting the buildings serving as a catwalk, and a large window system and pattern creates a heavy appearance that emphasizes the mass. The design of the buildings on the site of the factory are simple with straightforward detailing on the historic buildings, as they historically served a purpose as an industrial facility. Additionally, the dark metal canopies and large metal brackets that are proposed on the buildings accentuate the horizontality of the buildings, thus adding to the building's mass and heaviness. Feedback from DRC members from the May DRC meeting included comments on the use of brick and dark metal elements, which create a very heavy design, and it was suggested to explore a redesign of the repetitive metal canopy and porch elements, as this created a strong horizontal band and articulation. While some of the covered porches have been removed, the design still reads very heavy. Additionally, another concern was that it was creating a false sense of history and a false industrial district with the design elements that are incorporated. It was noted that the factory does not utilize many elements that are proposed, and the nearby historic building should be the visual highlight. Staff recommends a significant redesign in order to ultimately be able to achieve a COA. Then moving on to the signage modifications of standards. Several modifications of standards for signage are proposed to be utilized within the development. If they are approved by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, the modification of standards changes the zoning standard to be the proposed language and opens the door to allow the Historic Zoning Commission to consider certain signage not in the guidelines, but all signage that doesn't meet the guidelines would still require a COA issued by the Historic Zoning Commission, but doesn't guarantee approval of a COA. So the first one is the sign proportion and shape. The request to have the sign shape, such as the small hanging projecting sign, be irregularly shaped could be supported by the guidelines if the color, size, number of signs, and placement and other recommendations are met by the proposed sign. However, it is suggested that the signage type for an irregular shape be limited to the small hanging projecting signs, as this has been approved at the factory.
For the internal illumination, the request to have internally lit signage and LED signage is proposed. The only LED signage in the HPO is the historically reproduced LED sign that is seen at Gray's and at the theater's marquee. This type of signage illumination is not recommended by the guidelines, nor is it appropriate in the historic district. For the third modification of standard, it is for canopy signage. The request is to have one canopy sign per tenant. It isn't clear how many canopy signs this modification of standard could create per building, which currently allows one per building facade. It is also requested to have the signage for the canopy project above or below the canopy. It's proposed to utilize internal illumination on the sign. Currently, external illumination is the only type of illumination that is permitted for any signs in the historic district. Again, it is unknown how many tenants are being proposed to utilize this type of sign on a building. As proposed, utilizing multiple canopy signs per facade, signage projecting above or below the canopy, and the use of internal illumination appears to read as a contemporary sign and would not align with the other signs within the HPO. For the final modification of standard, it is requesting to increase the number of vertical blade signs to a maximum of one per commercial mixed-use building where residential is on the upper floors over the commercial part, and allow it if other hanging signage is present. It is unknown how many of these signs are proposed or where they will be located. Not enough information is known to be able to support this request. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, commissioners, that's a lot.
Yes, it is
Go
a
ahead,
lot.
Lisa.
So, Emily, a question. You mentioned the inconsistency with the nearby adjacent historic structure or historic structures, right? And by that, you're referring to which ones?
So on Morningside Drive, there are a series of buildings that are circa late 1960, early 1970, and so they are deemed historic per federal guidelines for the age of the building. So that is one of the buildings that could be considered historic. And also on Morningside Drive, there is a reproduction of a 1928 farmhouse that was reconstructed. And so those would be the adjacent ones.
Yeah, I remember going out of my way to go on Morningside Drive to get a sense. Of course, here, we're looking at something that is using the factory as the basis for design, but you didn't mention that as sort of the context. Is there a reason for that?
So it's not connected. This is, let's see if I can get to one of the overviews. So this isn't connected to the factory. It is, we have the Harpeth Industrial Court, and so the Harpeth Industrial Court divides this development with the factory. So it's not connecting, and so it's not adjacent to the site.
Understood. I recall that we had a site visit based on the original design, which was very helpful. I'm tempted to ask for another one simply because this is such a significant development and proposal, and there's nothing like a site visit to get a sense of the height and mass that we're speaking of. And we're establishing a precedent here that we need to be really cautious about. So I know that doesn't really give you any direction in terms of the design, but it just, it's difficult to get a sense of the context at this point. It's just not, from my perspective, and I think the guidelines reflect this, that the context does not support this. It's beautifully done, it truly is, but it's just not consistent enough from what I can see.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question real quick? Is that all right?
Sure, go ahead.
I know we've talked about the Morningside homes. We haven't heard the mention of, I know they were redone in 2020. I think voted on by the Historic Zoning Commission, new roof, new colors, new doors. That mid-century modern feel, I think, is a relatively new feel for those homes. So we're just curious of how, is it the kind of revisions to the home, or is it what they are now? What context of that, I guess, is what we're trying to understand, is where we should be feeding off of that in some way?
Yeah, I think we've talked about this before in that they are, because they're in the historic, the HPO, that even though they might be considered non-contributing, the commission has the ability to say, well, we still want to be considerate of those homes and can consider them as historic properties. And I think staff mentioned that, national kind of guidelines has this, was it a 50-year running clock? So tomorrow, a whole new batch of houses will be historic according to the federal government. Whether right or wrong, that's the truth. And I think overall, hopefully I can speak for the commissioners here. What I've heard is that we want to be thoughtful of those homes. I'm not sure we have to make some determination that they're historic or not, but we want to be considerate of them as neighbors in the HPO regardless. I think that's true. And we might want to make some determination there, but the feedback about adjacencies and setbacks from that last Morningside house have been important to us because it's somebody's property. Whether it's rental or full-time living or whatever is really here nor there. It's really the proximity and being respectful of something that's mid-century, one-story kind of ranch thing. There's got to be some transition from that structure to what you all are proposing. And I think that's what Lisa was keying in on is, well, this is a new scale for this area, specifically here. And, I was looking at the Google Maps and how close it is to the factory. The factory's, got some height, but is fairly low slung in comparison to some of the things that are going up around it. And the hotel's going to be right there, 10% bigger or something like that. So we're trying to consider all these, and Morningside's part of that. Brian?
I know this is, it's conflicting. It's conflicting for me as a commissioner because I look at the site and I think, what is appropriate for that site in the historic zone? I understand where we have historic properties that are mid-century modern just because of their date. And I would say that a lot of the commercial businesses on Harpeth Industrial Drive, some of them probably date to the same time period. And we know all that's outside of the historic zoning overlay. So that's going to be developed, and this commission will have no input into what goes in that area. I know zoning will have input, but not the commission. Because it says Harpeth Industrial Court, I look at it and I think, well, it was an industrial area. I mean, you are going to be adjacent to an industrial area. So, I mean, there's just so many, but is that, having that look, is that what we want in that location? But I do think it may not be like the factory and shouldn't be exactly like the factory, nor is it adjacent to the factory, but it is going to be adjacent to an industrial area. They will be developed. I do agree with staff on the parking. I don't think we want to see a lot of parallel parking spots as you come into the site where the hill is concerned. I mean, the hill is the queen. I do appreciate that you've added more of a buffer between Morningside. I mean, that has been one of my largest concerns, is that it was just adjacent right up onto it. You've created 176 feet. I mean, even for National Register property, we would say 75 feet. I think that's more than double. It is a precedent site, because what happens here is going to happen also probably at Harpeth Industrial Court. The dark colors, I mean, I've wrestled with that some. You know, those colors will recede. I mean, what do you want? I think more of a light color, that's going to show up a lot more. So I think some of the colors that you're dealing with will recede behind the hill. Two, from the pictures we've seen, we haven't seen a lot of visibility from Franklin Road to the development. There may be some, there's not a lot. So I mean, there's just a lot to consider. Modification of standards, I think we're going to have to take that on a case-by-case basis as you bring that to us. And I don't know what to say about it. There's a lot here. There's a lot going on. There seems to be a lot of other ideas that are floating around, but these are the ideas you're bringing to us. And I think these are the ideas we should consider.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Brian said. The modification of standards, I think you really have to look at the real proposals, which is hard, I know, for you all, because it's like, well, we don't know whose tenants are, going to end up where, or what those arrangements might be. But, I think it's always been more fruitful for us to just look at exact positioning and what the sign is and just what the ask is. Even if it's not the ultimate tenant's name, what is that sign and where is it? And I think you might go back and see the way the factory kind of coded all theirs, because they had a lot of signage. But we did kind of approve kind of a nebulous chunk of stuff, but everything came back for a COA eventually. But in order for us to be really considerate when giving a recommendation to Planning Commission or BOMA on these modification of standards, I just probably need to know more than, hey, we think we might want to do something like these. It's like, well, that's good. How many and where is important, I think. So it speaks to a magnitude of nonconformity with the guidelines, if that makes sense. And for special circumstances, we've altered from the guidelines. I think you can go back and find lots of precedent for that. But, we do consider the magnitude of how many and how big the alterations are. So there's that. I agreed, even before staff and Brian said something, I was like, are we really going to parallel park cars up and down the driveway around this hill? And, I'm no Civil War historian, but I'm pretty sure they stood on that hill and looked across the cars there at the south charging through downtown. So that's the point is, there's some views that the city of Franklin has been very intentional about preserving. And part of it's Harlansdale, all the battlefield stuff. We've got Roper's Knob and this area. And I don't think it would be good for one of those primary views, which is sort of southwest, to have cars along it. So I don't know what that means if it's pulling back behind the tree line. There's a pretty dense kind of tree line between the hill and the development. If it pulled back to there, I think would be a starting place for compromise. I don't know. But to get it that close to Franklin Road speaks to the guidelines, because they don't recommend parking in the front of houses for sure, and then commercial, it talks about, being screened from view shed. So work on that a little bit would be better. What else did I write down? When we were out there on our site visit, we looked at balloons on lifts and all these things, which was very helpful. You have added a little mast to this little jewel box building, right? It was a smaller ice cream stand, and now it's two ice cream stands and a two-story building attached to the back, right? So it's a little bigger. And so I guess my question is, did that change any of the visibility now that it's, I know the height was on here somewhere in this, 32 feet 6 to the top of the second story, and it's, 80 feet closer to the Franklin Road. From what I saw, I don't think it would be, but I'd love a definitive kind of answer on, did that change anything? And then staff talked a lot about kind of the architecture, the colors, and the heaviness. I think it does look industrial, which I think you were going for. The outlier to that is this white painted thing in the front, and I'm glad you put it in there because it's a contrast to sort of talking points between the parties here. It's like, well, white stands out a lot. I don't know that that's probably the best way to go, something that bold out front. I like the color scheme of the big buildings. I think for me, it's more of the massiveness of the brickwork, the fact that those brick pilasters are 3 stories tall, things like that. If there's a way to, and I think you've done some of this from our last conversation, that kind of really defined base where the commercial is, and then a middle, and then a top. And the top right now is reading a little top heavy with all the brickwork, because the brickwork goes most of the way up the 3rd story. So if there's a way to cull that back some, and maybe these corner kind of anchors where you've got, it's bumped out at the corners. If that brickwork went up like you've done, and it's a little more monumental, and then the in-betweens kind of recessed and didn't have so much brick, I think that could help bring the scale down a little bit, just perceived scale. And then there's some buildings that have brick from stem to stern, which really looks industrial, but different than maybe the factory or some of the other precedent is the factory doesn't have a lot of big 2-story brick walls, right? It's got 1 story and low slung roof, but that low slung roof is a really long run, so it can get up to 40 feet tall or whatever. But so some of the materiality at the top where it meets the sky, if it could be lightened up, I think could help you not feel so massive. Thank you for the adjustments to the southernmost building. I think that helps Morningside Drive. To Brian's point, there's no telling what's going to be up and down Industrial Drive. Planning can be more restrictive and less restrictive in other ways. So the point is, we're not going to get to review it, and it will probably be something. I think Envision Franklin is envisioning such. I don't feel as if maybe you're on the wrong track. This isn't the right thing to put there. I think it needs to be lightened up and the details thought about a little bit more. And then some of the other things with the parking and more detail on modification of standards, that kind of stuff would be helpful. Anything additionally? Lisa, any other thing?
The church you referred to, what church is that? When you're facing it, is it on the left?
I think
To the
it's
north.
the Church of Christ.
It's
Yeah.
just north,
Where?
right there,
Oh,
north of the hill and the
Okay.
mixed use.
Okay. Would that be considered an adjacent building to determine context or not?
I would need to do some more research to determine its age.
Yeah, I was just curious.
Good question.
I think it's probably 80s or 90s.
Yeah. And that's in the, that's in the HPO because it goes down Franklin Road.
It's all the way to Mac Hatcher.
Yep. That's what I understood. Okay. All right. Anything additionally that you'd like for us to think about and give you some feedback on?
No, I think just to speak to the parallel parking a little bit, because of the pedestrian activity, we do feel like parallel parking helps slow people down. Also, it creates parking for the adjacent park that's there. Currently, your parking is all behind the buildings per zoning code and per the historic guidelines. So trying to create some parking where people don't feel like they have to necessarily be in a parking deck behind a commercial building to be able to enjoy the park. We also feel like it's a spot that as people are going between Harlansdale and downtown, like it speaks for some parking, but understand the reference when at Main Street with the parking in front. I know it's 45, right? No. Yeah, it's not 45.
What's 45?
The parallel parking out front, or the parking out front. It's parallel.
All parallel.
So we're trying to mimic some of that, understanding that the mass of our parking, off-street parking lots are behind the building. But if there's some way to like, I like the idea of pulling it behind the
Well, the idea,
trees.
the difference between downtown's parallel parking and this is the whole interpretation of this park is, you know, open space in a Civil War site. So, you know, we can make an argument for downtown Franklin being a Civil War site too, but it's not the same thing. You know, that's my only concern is that people who have come here, and we do attract a lot of people for our Civil War sites, culture, story, all of that, that if they come here, the view isn't, oh, look, there's Harlansdale beyond all these cars, and, you know, we want people to, you know, throw frisbees and fly kites and all that stuff, but the cars can probably find somewhere else. And, you know, there's countless developments here in town where those are the first spots on the driveway that just fill up before the parking garage or parking deck or any other surface lots, just because they're closest to when you come in. And so I see that front side being just loaded so fast and it just being full of cars all the time. I like the idea that it controls speed a little bit because people do slow down, but there's other mechanisms for that. We have really great police department here.
And I wouldn't say I was opposed to all the parallel parking spots. Maybe you get kind of past that curve,
Mm-hmm.
where, you know, where you're more kind of past that tree line some. Maybe you could still maintain those parallel parking spots there.
Yep. Yeah, that's what we were talking about earlier. Behind that tree line, all of a sudden, that's not the primary view shed. Especially, I mean, people are going to go up the hill to, you know, you hope they go up there to look at your buildings. But the idea is they came to the park to enjoy the park. So just an adjustment there. And, you know, that may screw up parking counts or something. You may have to contend with that. But I think from our perspective, that would be better to adjust that.
And I think you'll have most of the people parking in those spots for the commercial complex.
That's what I'm
than
saying.
for the trail.
They'll fill up because it's, oh, there's an open spot right when I pulled in. Why would I go way back there? I can park in the front. Yeah. All right. Thank y'all very much. Appreciate it. Thanks. Item 7. Last, certainly not least. Discussion of demolition at 119 Church Street. John Ligon. Hello. Good evening. How you doing? Good.
I think we just had two main issues. One being the outbuilding, and somehow that did not make it into the application. Pictures were formatted wrong. I don't know if you want to look at these.
Give them to staff, yeah, and then we'll take the other copy. We'll pass it around here. if you don't mind.
The building's like a
Thank you.
old Sears and Roebuck, portable tin building.
Yeah.
Has no real significance. There's another one just like it in the next lot.
Yeah, they bought a 2-for-1.
Yeah.
Got a deal. Okay. Yeah, I think that it was described that way in our last meeting, and that makes sense. It's good to have the photographs of it so that we all feel good that we've seen it at least.
Yeah, and I think the other issue was where we got the numbers from on construction. I am a contractor, I've been licensed for over 28 years, working primarily in Williamson County, so that's how I came up with the numbers for the rehab and the new construction.
Okay,
And I'm probably a little too conservative on them, but
fair enough. Anything else you want to add?
no, I think that was
Okay,
our main issues, wasn't it?
let's hear from staff. Emily, you've got some comments for us?
Yes, sir. So the property at 119 Church Street is located in the downtown Franklin National Register Historic District, and the National Register lists the building at 119 Church Street as non-contributing and defines the building as an extensively altered circa 1920 1.5-story frame gabled-in dwelling. And the proposals for the demolition of the principal building and the proposal to demolish the building has been before the DRC twice, and then to the July Historic Zoning Commission where it was deferred. According to the submitted materials, the building is estimated to have been constructed between 1920 and 1924, and the building is depicted on the 1928 Sanborn map, which was included within this application, and here's it zoomed in with a red arrow pointing to it. And then also, the footprint remains unchanged on the 1950 Sanborn map. But it had a front addition on the right side. Since then, the guidelines do recommend conducting routine maintenance and major repairs on historic structures to ensure their preservation. Demolition is not permitted unless there are extraordinary circumstances so as to maintain the integrity and sense of place associated with Franklin's historic districts. And the guidelines provide that demolition can only be approved if the Historic Zoning Commission deems one of the more following conditions met: if the building has lost its architectural and historical integrity and its removal will not adversely affect the district's historic character, if the denial of the demolition will result in an unreasonable economic hardship on the applicant as determined by the Historic Zoning Commission, and if the structural instability or deterioration of a property is demonstrated through a report by a structural engineer or architect with demonstrated experience working with historic structures. This report must clearly detail the property's physical condition, reasons why rehabilitation is not feasible, and cost estimates for rehabilitation versus demolition and construction of a comparable structure. In addition to this report, there should be a separate report that details future action on the site. So we do have some points for the DRC to consider in the discussion of this request. And the first is whether the Historic Zoning Commission considers this building to be a historic structure. It was mentioned at a previous DRC meeting that if aluminum siding is on a building over wood siding, the National Register wouldn't list the building as contributing, but aluminum siding is easily removable. This building was also built by an African American family and one of the few remaining in the downtown historic district. Sometimes there are buildings that are locally historic but not nationally historic, so this is the first question for the DRC to discuss. The second is if the Historic Zoning Commission considers the building to be locally historic, then it should be considered for rehabilitation. As mentioned previously, demolition should only be considered if there are extraordinary circumstances, and this has rarely ever been approved in Franklin when a building is historic. Any building is possible to rehabilitate with extensive repairs which has been done in many other situations throughout the historic districts with similar levels of significant disrepair. It's up to the Historic Zoning Commission to determine whether it's able to be rehabilitated and also whether the cost would create a hardship in doing so. Third, if the Historic Zoning Commission determines that it is not locally historic, then demolition could be supported. And finally, the application states that the site would be green space until a larger development proposal is submitted. If the building is demolished and new development is proposed, staff would consider that buildings that were historically there in advising the applicant on the form, scale, character, and rhythms of the buildings on the block face. This was a single-family residential, and the residential house building form with similar scale to the buildings historically on the street would be recommended for scale and massing. Thanks.
Thank you very much. All right. Who wants to kick us off? Lisa?
So speaking of adjoining buildings for future proposed construction, if the demolition is approved, what exactly is showing on the Sanborn map that's next door to it?
So 117 Church Street, and correct me if I'm wrong, it burned within the past couple years, and so it's no longer there. So it's just an open green spot.
It's been more than a couple of years, but.
Okay.
But
You
yeah,
think
no,
maybe
it burned.
10-ish, 10, 15-ish?
Been a while.
You think it was 10?
It's been 10 to 15.
Yeah. Yeah,
Less than 20.
yeah, less than 20.
So this building is a concrete block garage, and so I believe that this one was both of these buildings on the site here, I believe it's 109 Church Street, they are both contributing within the National Register. This one's, I believe, 1930, 1940, and then this one's 1850, 1860, around that time, and they're both contributing.
So we haven't heard from the applicant about what the plan is. I mean, we know that you're asking for demolition. Part of what our commission needs to do is to understand what the future holds for
We don't have a
this
plan on
law.
that as of yet. We really only owned it since February, personally.
So the documentation says that this particular lot, like 117, will just become just green space until you figure out what you want to do with it.
And then we'll come back before y'all and present it.
Okay. Anything else, Lisa? Questions? Let me come back to you.
Yeah, no, just that the submittals of supporting, engineering study and structural engineer, structural inspection, all of that is very thorough, and our commission, just when it comes to demolition of a property that is potentially historically significant, I would say our standards are pretty high when it comes to saying, well, it's not something that can be repaired. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Brian?
Well, I have to say, as Lisa, that you have to pass a high bar for historic demolition within the historic zoning overlay. And that's always been the way I understood it in the guidelines, and how I personally think about it too, because we protect our historic properties. I know that aluminum siding was mentioned in the last one as far as maybe being a reason why this was considered a non-contributing structure. I don't really know why the the surveyors at the time actually listed that on the survey. But I do know on Fair Street, I mean, there's a Queen Anne house that has aluminum siding that was listed as contributing. So I find it very hard to believe that was the reason, or the only reason, that they said this was non-contributing. I really don't know. They're not here to ask them. Is it historic structure? Well, you know, by our definition of historic, anything older than 50 years old is a historic structure. So you have to say, yes, it is a historic structure that was deemed by the National Register at the time to be non-contributing. And I think they knew it was not a 1970s or 80s house. So then I have to fall back on, okay, I know this is true. We're not for demolition. It's called a non-contributing structure. I have to then fall back on the guidelines. So I'm given three criteria to consider. And one of those, it's lost, and it means historic properties too, not just houses that are not historic. But has it lost its historic integrity? So that's number one. And number two is it in such disrepair that it's just really not feasible to save the structure? And then the third being the financial hardship. So I always weigh by all of those. And most of the time, I find it very difficult for any structure to meet any of those criteria when we're asked for demolition. But the only caveat for this one is that I know that a tree fell on this house over 2 years ago. I think the tree limb or whatever is still on the house. There's a large gaping hole. It has been exposed to the weather for 2 years. And I just know, as a matter of fact, as someone who's done historic renovation and repair, that it's beyond repair. And so then what do we have if we say save a wall, save one wall, and rebuild the thing? Well, you don't have a historic structure. You have a reproduction. And in my sense, a false sense of history. You know, people look at it and say, well, that's a historic structure. Well, no, it's not. You know, it is a new structure. So that, for me, is the conflict. If we say to the homeowner, oh, no, you've got to take and rebuild the whole thing, and we're going to call it historic, you know, it seems like at this point with the engineer's letters and, you know, with Toothman, what Toothman said about it can't even be moved, that it is beyond repair. So whatever, if the commission votes for no demolition, then the applicant would have to just completely rebuild the whole house. So it's a new house. So for me, I mean, that's why I would support demolition in this case, because I believe it has met the criteria for demolition, unfortunately. And I think it should be a lesson to us in our city not to allow, if we see this, you know, that someone says something about it so that repairs can be made early enough that we don't have this condition.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. Yeah, I feel very similarly, and he, you know, was able to put it in good terms. The house, you know, you've a lot of people pick one avenue of proving that it needs to be demoed. You've got evidence for really all three. And I've reviewed all the structural reports ad nauseum, probably just like you have, and I'm like, yeah, this thing's got issues. Now, can everything be fixed? Absolutely. That could all be fixed. But again, it'd be nothing old in it. It'd all have to come out to get fixed. And then, you know, the architectural integrity of this house, I mean, it does have a front addition. I'm sure that those folks that came to the survey saw it and went, well, it wasn't that shaped when it started. It's got a front addition, something that we would never allow ever on this commission. So there's lots of things have been done to this that have altered it to maybe make it a non-contributing structure anyways. And then the fact that it's been open for years is, you know, exacerbates its already non-contributing condition. It's got some issues. I will say, just for precedent's sake, I think and this is not a slight to you at all as a contractor, but any estimates should probably come from a third party. Surely you can understand why that's a conflict of interest.
Yeah, no, I
But-
consulted 5
Yeah.
contractors.
Yeah, so if you talk to those contractors, have them write the letter and verify. And the guidelines really read that I think an architect or structural engineer, correct me if I'm wrong, with experience in historic structures is supposed to make the recommendation. I don't know any architects or structural engineers that do any money estimating at all. They go to contractors, but, those architects and engineers can receive the estimates from contractors and put it in their letter and go, talk to these people. This is what they told me the numbers are. I think it holds up to a community standard at that point when a third party is saying it costs this much. Like I said, not a slight to you or your experience. I looked at the numbers and I, based on what I see every day as an architect, I think they're reasonable. But, I can't take homeowners' word for it because the next person that comes in may not have your experience and go,
Yeah.
well, he said that it costs this much, and now I'm saying mine costs this much. So all that to say, I agree with Brian. I would love to keep this out. I wish this house was in its original state and just had a tree fall on it, and we'd be looking at the same original front porch that went across where that addition is, and there was wood siding still showing, and it just looked like the beautiful house that it originally was. But it's been muddled with, and now it's severely damaged, and for that, I agree with Brian. So,
And I'd like to say, this is my opinion based on how I interpret the guidelines. There are 3 of us here. That means there are 6 other commissioners that may have vastly different opinions, and I wish there were more here to weigh in on it.
Yeah.
yeah, I would venture to say that we will have some differing opinions. So,
Yeah.
I would expect that, and I'm glad we do. So,
But
anything
yeah,
else?
Brian put it very well, that if it were even attempted to repair, restore, it would never accomplish the local historicity that we would value anyway. So whatever is going to replace the house will come before us, and then, of course, we'll take the historic context into consideration, so.
And as staff said, they'll use this house and what burned down as part of the form setting precedent. So that, I think that's helpful. Okay.
Do you have any photographs of the house that burned down?
I can look. I don't know that I do. But I can look.
That would be interesting. If you do, and you have Rick Warwick's email address, which I can provide, but I could give to staff, they could provide, or you could find it through the Heritage Foundation. He'd love to have that.
Oh, yeah.
It'd be great, to have that record.
Okay. I'm looking up Google Maps and
And that is
rewinding
the
it.
older, that was an older structure than the one that was in the middle. So the one that burned was the oldest structure.
And doing some research, it was contributing to the district. And this building is actually older in age than the one that did burn. I think it was circa 1930s, and this one was circa 1920s. But this one at 119 Church Street was considered non-contributing. So,
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. If there's nothing else, we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you
Appreciate
so
it.
much. All right. Staff announcements, please.
just one real quick, that we have a special DRC meeting for new City Hall elements and the new City Hall Park on Tuesday, July 29th, starting at 3 o'clock here at Eastern Flank. And we'd love to see everyone.
Okay.
And that's next Tuesday?
Yes, sir.
3 o'clock.
Yes, sir.
Early. All right, if nothing else, we are adjourned. Thank you so much.